If you've found your way here tonight, something inside you is asking for rest. Maybe your mind won't stop spinning with worry. Maybe you're carrying the weight of everyone else's problems on your shoulders. Maybe you're just tired of trying so hard to hold everything together, tired of feeling responsible for things you can't control, tired of lying awake wondering if you're doing enough. You're not alone in this feeling. Around the world right now, people just like you are searching for that deep kind of peace that doesn't depend on everything going perfectly. If it feels right to you, take a moment to let us know where you're listening from and what time it is in your world. There's something beautiful about knowing we're all sharing this journey together, even across different time zones and circumstances. While you're here, please make yourself as comfortable as possible. Maybe adjust your pillow, pull up a soft blanket, or simply let your body settle into whatever position feels most restful. This is your time, your space, your permission to finally put down whatever you've been carrying. Welcome to Moonmind Temple, where ancient wisdom meets modern peace. Over the next few hours, we're going to walk together through teachings that have helped people find deep rest for over 2,000 years. These aren't complicated spiritual practices or abstract ideas you'll never use. They're simple truths that will change how you carry yourself through the world, starting tonight. Tonight is about learning to distinguish between what's yours to hold and what's yours to release. It's about discovering that the weight you've been carrying might not actually belong to you. And it's about finding that place of stillness inside yourself that remains peaceful even when everything around you feels chaotic. There's something that happens to people who care deeply about others. Without even realizing it, they begin to absorb the emotions of everyone around them. A friend calls upset about their relationship, and suddenly you're lying awake at night worrying about their marriage. A coworker shares their stress about a deadline, and you find yourself feeling anxious about a project that isn't even yours. Your adult child faces a challenge, and you feel the weight of their struggle as if it were your own responsibility to solve. In a monastery high in the mountains, there lived a young monk who had this exact problem. Every person who came to the temple seeking guidance would leave their emotional burdens with him. He would listen to their sorrows, their fears, their anger, and somehow all of these feelings would remain in his heart long after the visitors had gone. Night after night, he would lie awake carrying the pain of dozens of people, wondering why his compassion seemed to be destroying his inner peace. One morning, exhausted and confused, he approached his teacher. "Master," he said, "I try to help everyone who comes to me with their problems. I listen to their pain, I carry their worries, I lose sleep thinking about their struggles. But the more I try to help, the more exhausted I become. What am I doing wrong?" The teacher led him to a well in the courtyard and pointed to the bucket beside it. "Tell me," the teacher said gently, "when you draw water from this well to give to a thirsty person, do you also drink the entire bucket yourself?" The young monk looked puzzled. "Of course not, Master. I would give them the water and keep only what I need." The teacher smiled with infinite kindness. "Then why, when someone brings you their emotional pain, do you drink their entire bucket of suffering and leave them with empty hands?" This simple question changed everything for the young monk, and it can change everything for you too. You can offer compassion without absorbing pain. You can be present for someone's struggle without making it your own. You can listen with your whole heart without carrying their burden in your chest when they leave. The well doesn't become empty when it gives water, and your heart doesn't become depleted when it offers love without attachment. This is one of the most profound teachings in Buddhist wisdom, the understanding that true compassion flows freely without creating suffering for the giver. Right now, as you listen to these words, notice if there's a tightening in your chest when you think about someone else's problems. That physical tension is a signal that you might be carrying emotional weight that belongs to them. Your body is incredibly wise. It will always tell you when you've crossed the line from helping to carrying. The Buddhist understanding is beautifully clear about this. Every person has their own path to walk, their own lessons to learn, their own emotional weather to experience. When you try to take that away from them, you're not actually helping. You're interfering with their growth while exhausting your own spirit. It's like trying to breathe for someone else, impossible and harmful to both of you. There's a fundamental difference between empathy and absorption. Empathy allows you to understand and connect with someone's experience. Absorption means you take on their experience as if it were your own. One creates connection and healing, the other creates confusion and depletion. Imagine for a moment that your energy is like sunlight. The sun doesn't deplete itself by shining on flowers. It doesn't become dimmer because it also shines on weeds. It simply radiates its natural warmth and lets each plant respond in its own way. You can offer the same kind of presence to others, warm, steady, available, but not responsible for how they grow. In another village, there was an old woman known throughout the region for her incredible peace. People would travel for days to bring their troubles to her door. They would arrive heavy with sorrow and somehow leave feeling lighter, clearer, more capable of handling their own lives. But here's what surprised everyone who knew her. She never seemed drained by these interactions. Even after the most intense conversations, she would return to her garden with the same gentle smile, the same quiet contentment. One day, a visitor asked her secret. She pointed to a beautiful fountain she had built in her garden, where water flowed constantly from a natural spring. "Watch the water," she said softly. "It flows constantly to whoever needs it, the birds, the flowers, anyone who comes to drink. But notice what happens to the source. Does the spring become empty because it gives? Or does it stay full because it only gives what naturally flows?" This is the heart of healthy compassion in Zen teaching. True giving doesn't deplete because it comes from a source that refills itself. But when you try to give what you don't have, when you try to fix what isn't yours to fix, you create suffering for yourself and confusion for others. The spring gives water, not its entire underground source. You can give love, support, and presence without giving away your peace. The Buddha taught that suffering comes from attachment, and this includes attachment to other people's emotions. When you become attached to fixing someone else's feelings, when you can't rest until they're okay, you've moved beyond compassion into a subtle form of control. Your peace becomes dependent on their emotional state, which means neither of you is truly free. The challenge is recognizing when you've crossed that invisible line from helping to carrying. It usually feels like a subtle shift from listening to fixing, from being present to being responsible. Your body will tell you when this happens. There's a difference between the warm expansion that comes with genuine compassion and the tight, anxious feeling that comes with emotional responsibility that isn't yours. Compassion feels spacious and open. It allows the other person to have their experience without needing to change it. Emotional absorption feels cramped and urgent. It carries an undercurrent of, "This shouldn't be happening," or "I need to fix this." Learning to distinguish between these two feelings is one of the most important skills you can develop. In Buddhist practice, this is called loving detachment, and it sounds contradictory until you experience it. It's actually the most loving thing you can do. When you stop trying to rescue everyone from their feelings, you give them space to develop their own emotional strength. When you stop absorbing their pain, you stay clear enough to offer real wisdom instead of reactive sympathy. Think about the people in your life who feel most supportive to you. Chances are, they're not the ones who panic when you're upset or who try to talk you out of your feelings. They're the ones who can sit with you in your difficulty without becoming overwhelmed themselves. They offer their presence without trying to control your experience. This is what you can learn to offer others. There's an old Zen saying, "You can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf." This applies perfectly to emotions, both your own and others. You can't stop someone else from feeling sad, angry, or afraid. But you can learn to surf these emotional waves when they come into your presence. You can stay balanced on your own board while they navigate their own waters. Let this understanding settle into your body now. Feel how different it is to think about someone you care about with love rather than with worry. Notice how love feels open and spacious, while worry feels tight and constricted. Love trusts, worry tries to control. Love offers, worry demands. You can choose love in every interaction. You can choose to trust that others are capable of handling their own emotional weather with your support, but not your sacrifice. This doesn't mean becoming cold or disconnected. It means becoming more genuinely helpful because you're not drowning in the very emotions you're trying to help them navigate. As you breathe right now, imagine releasing any emotions you've been carrying that don't belong to you. Not with coldness, not with rejection, but with the understanding that returning these feelings to their rightful owner is an act of love, both for them and for yourself. You can care deeply without carrying heavily. You can love completely without losing yourself. Picture those emotions floating away from your body like clouds moving across the sky. They're not being destroyed or dismissed. They're simply returning to where they belong. And in the space they leave behind, you can feel your own natural peace beginning to emerge. This peace was always there, waiting beneath the weight you thought you had to carry. You're not responsible for other people's happiness. You're not responsible for protecting anyone from their own feelings. You're not responsible for making sure everyone around you is okay before you can rest. These responsibilities were never yours to begin with, even though your caring heart may have picked them up along the way. What you are responsible for is your own presence, your own kindness, your own inner peace. And the beautiful paradox is that the more you tend to your own emotional garden, the more you have to offer others. The spring that doesn't run dry is the one that's connected to its own deep source. Tonight, as you continue this journey with us, you're learning to distinguish between the weight that's yours and the weight that isn't. You're discovering that letting go of what doesn't belong to you isn't selfish, it's necessary. It's how you preserve your capacity to show up fully for what is actually yours to handle. And it's how you model for others what healthy emotional boundaries look like. Feel your shoulders dropping slightly as this truth settles in. Notice how your breathing naturally deepens when you're not carrying the emotional burdens of everyone around you. This is what your nervous system feels like when it's not in constant rescue mode. This is what peace feels like when it's not dependent on everyone else being okay. The young monk in our story learned to give water without drinking the whole bucket. The old woman learned to let her compassion flow like a spring without depleting the source. And you're learning right now that the most loving thing you can do is to stop carrying what was never yours to hold. This is where true healing begins, not in fixing everyone else, but in returning to your own wholeness so you can offer genuine support instead of shared suffering. But even after you've learned to stop carrying others' emotions, there's often something else that keeps your mind spinning through the night. It's the way your thoughts grab onto moments from the day and refuse to let them go, replaying conversations that already ended, rehearsing scenarios that may never happen, carrying mental stones long after you've left the place where you picked them up. There's a story that's been told in Zen monasteries for centuries about two monks who were traveling together on a long journey. They came to a river where the water was high and the current was strong. Standing at the bank was a young woman in an elegant silk dress, clearly unable to cross without ruining her clothing. Without hesitation, the older monk lifted her onto his back and carried her safely across the river. He set her down gently on the other side. She thanked him gracefully, and the two monks continued on their path. For the next several hours, the younger monk walked in complete silence, his mind churning with agitation. Finally, unable to contain himself any longer, he burst out, "How could you do that? Our vows forbid us from touching women, and yet you picked her up and carried her across the river. How can you call yourself a monk after breaking such a sacred rule?" The older monk looked at his companion with gentle surprise. "I set that woman down hours ago at the river," he said quietly. "Why are you still carrying her?" This simple exchange reveals something we all do constantly, something that steals our peace more effectively than any external circumstance. We encounter a moment, someone says something that bothers us, a situation doesn't go according to plan, a worry enters our thoughts, and then we carry it with us, long after it's passed. We replay conversations that already ended. We rehearse arguments with people who aren't even there. We turn over problems in our minds like stones in our pockets, worn smooth by constant handling, but never actually solved by all that mental friction. The older monk in the story demonstrates something that Buddhist teachers call natural mind, the ability to meet each moment fully, when it arises, respond appropriately to what's actually happening, and then let the moment complete itself. He didn't carry the experience beyond its natural lifespan. His mind stayed clear because he wasn't trying to hold on to something that had already passed. But the younger monk shows us what most of us do most of the time. He took a moment that lasted perhaps 5 minutes and stretched it into hours of internal suffering. He wasn't experiencing the river crossing anymore. That was over and done. He was experiencing his thoughts about the river crossing, his judgments about what had happened, his mental replay of an event that no longer existed anywhere except in his mind. This is what Zen wisdom calls mental carrying, and it's different from the emotional carrying we talked about earlier. Mental carrying is when your thoughts grab onto experiences and refuse to let them pass naturally. It's the difference between experiencing something and thinking about experiencing something. One happens in the present moment and then flows on. The other happens in your head and can go on indefinitely. Right now, as you're listening to these words, you might notice your mind trying to carry something from earlier today. Maybe it's a conversation that didn't go the way you hoped. Maybe it's a mistake you made that you keep replaying. Maybe it's something you saw on the news that's stuck in your thoughts like a thorn. Notice how carrying these mental objects feels in your body. There's usually a subtle tension, a sense of weight, even though the original experience is long gone. The Buddha taught that this kind of mental carrying is one of the primary causes of suffering, and it's completely optional. You don't have to pick up every mental stone. You don't have to carry every conversation beyond the moment it ended. You don't have to react to every thought that crosses your awareness. The river in our story represents the present moment, where things arise and pass away naturally. The younger monk's agitation represents what happens when we refuse to let moments complete themselves. Life is constantly flowing, like that river the monks crossed. Experiences arise, peak, and dissolve in a natural rhythm. But our minds want to dam up certain moments and hold on to them. We replay conversations, worry about future scenarios, and argue with decisions that have already been made. None of this mental activity changes anything about reality, but it steals our peace and keeps us from being fully present to what's actually happening now. There's a profound difference between responding to life and reacting to thoughts about life. When you respond, you're present with what's actually occurring. When you react, you're often fighting with memories, projections, or mental interpretations that may have very little to do with what's real in this moment. The older monk responded to the woman's actual need. The younger monk reacted to his thoughts about what had happened. Consider how many of your daily stresses come from this mental carrying. How much of your worry is about things that haven't happened yet? How much of your anger is about conversations that ended hours or days ago? How much of your anxiety comes from rehearsing scenarios that may never occur? When you really examine it, you might discover that most of your mental suffering happens not during difficult events, but during the endless mental replay of those events. In one monastery, there was a monk who had developed such a habit of mental carrying that he would lie awake at night, replaying not just his own conversations, but conversations he had overheard between other people. His mind had become like a recorder that never stopped playing back the day's events. He would analyze what people meant by their tone of voice, worry about misunderstandings that might not have occurred, and rehearse better responses to situations that were already over. When he brought this problem to his teacher, the teacher led him to the temple bell. "Strike the bell," the teacher said. The monk struck it, and a clear, resonant tone filled the air. "Now," said the teacher, "make the sound continue without striking the bell again." The monk looked confused. "But master, The sound has already faded. I can't make it continue without striking the bell again. Exactly, smiled the teacher. So why do you keep trying to make conversations continue long after they've naturally ended? This teaching points to something fundamental about the nature of experience. Moments have a natural lifespan, just like the sound of a bell. They arise, they peak, they fade away. When we try to keep them going through mental repetition, we're like someone frantically shaking a bell that's no longer ringing, creating noise instead of music, effort instead of peace. The practice of letting moments complete themselves is incredibly liberating for the nervous system. When you stop trying to extend experiences beyond their natural duration, when you stop carrying conversations that have already ended, your mind begins to settle into its natural state of alert calm. It's like muddy water that finally has a chance to settle, revealing the clear depths that were always there. But how do you actually do this? How do you stop your mind from picking up every mental stone? The first step is simply noticing when you're doing it. Right now, take a moment to scan your awareness. Is there something from earlier today that you're still mentally carrying around? Maybe it's a conversation that didn't go well, a decision you're second-guessing, or a worry about something that might happen tomorrow. Feel the weight of carrying this mental stone. Notice how it creates a subtle tension in your body, a background static in your mind. Now imagine setting it down, not because you don't care, but because carrying it isn't helping anything. It's just making you tired. This isn't about dismissing important concerns or avoiding necessary problem solving. It's about recognizing the difference between productive thinking and mental spinning. Productive thinking happens in focused periods, when you're actually working on a solution. Mental spinning happens continuously in the background, rehashing the same thoughts without progress, like a hamster wheel for the mind. The Buddhist teaching of impermanence is crucial here. Everything that arises will also pass away. This includes thoughts, emotions, and mental fixations. When you stop feeding a mental pattern with your attention, it naturally dissolves. When you stop carrying thoughts beyond their useful lifespan, they complete themselves and fade away, just like the sound of the bell. There's another story about a student who complained to her meditation teacher that her mind was too busy to meditate. "Every time I sit down to be quiet," she said, "my thoughts start racing even faster. It's like trying to calm a pot of boiling water." The teacher nodded knowingly. "You're right. You can't calm boiling water by stirring it. But you also can't calm it by putting a lid on it and pretending it's not boiling. What do you do with boiling water when you want it to settle?" The student thought for a moment. "You remove it from the heat," she said. "Exactly. You stop feeding the fire." Your attention is the fire that keeps mental carrying alive. When you keep feeding attention to thoughts that want to replay endlessly, you're keeping them boiling. But when you gently withdraw your attention, not by fighting the thoughts, but by simply not engaging with them, they naturally settle. This practice of non-reactive awareness is like becoming the sky instead of the clouds. Clouds arise in the sky, move across it, and dissolve, but the sky itself remains unchanged. Thoughts arise in awareness, move through it, and dissolve, but awareness itself remains peaceful and clear. You can learn to identify more with the sky of awareness than with the passing clouds of thought. In Zen meditation, there's a beautiful teaching about sitting like a mountain while weather patterns pass by. The mountain doesn't react to every cloud that crosses its peak. It doesn't argue with the weather or try to control what kind of day it will be. It simply remains stable and present while all kinds of conditions move through the sky above it. Your awareness can learn to be like that mountain, grounded, peaceful, unshaken by the passing weather of thoughts and emotions. This quality of inner stillness isn't something you have to create from scratch. It's what naturally emerges when you stop picking up every mental stone, when you stop carrying conversations beyond their time, when you let moments complete themselves instead of extending them indefinitely in your mind. The stillness was always there, waiting beneath the mental noise. One of the most freeing realizations in Buddhist practice is that you don't have to believe every thought that arises in your mind. Thoughts are not facts. They're mental events that come and go like weather patterns. Some thoughts are useful and deserve your attention. Others are just mental habits, old patterns playing out, or random neural firing. Learning to distinguish between thoughts worth engaging and thoughts worth letting pass is one of the most valuable skills you can develop. The younger monk in our story believed his thoughts about the river crossing were important, urgent, deserving of hours of mental energy. But they were just thoughts, mental interpretations of an event that had already ended. The older monk had the wisdom to let the moment be what it was, and then let it go. He engaged fully when action was needed, and then returned to clear awareness when the action was complete. As you practice this letting go of mental carrying, you might notice that your relationship with time begins to change. Instead of living partially in the past through mental replay, and partially in the future through mental rehearsal, you begin to inhabit the present more fully. Time slows down because you're actually experiencing it instead of thinking about it. Moments become richer because you're present for them instead of already moving on to the next mental task. This presence is what creates the space for genuine wisdom to arise. When your mind isn't cluttered with mental stones from the day, when you're not carrying conversations that ended hours ago, there's room for fresh insight, creative solutions, and intuitive understanding. Clarity comes not from thinking harder, but from thinking less, or rather, from thinking more skillfully. Right now, as you feel this understanding settling into your body, notice how your breathing naturally begins to slow down. When the mind stops its constant reacting and carrying, the nervous system gets the message that it's safe to relax. Your shoulders might drop a little. Your jaw might soften. This is what happens when you finally set down the mental stones you've been carrying all day. The practice is simple but profound. When you notice your mind trying to carry something beyond its natural lifespan, gently set it down. When you catch yourself replaying a conversation that already ended, return to the present moment. When you find yourself rehearsing scenarios that may never happen, come back to what's actually here now. It's like training a puppy, gentle, consistent, patient redirection back to the present. Some days this will be easier than others. Some mental stones feel heavier, some patterns run deeper, some habits are more entrenched. That's completely normal. The goal isn't to have a perfectly quiet mind. It's to develop the skill of not being controlled by every thought that arises. Even the Buddha described his mind as sometimes being like a monkey jumping from branch to branch. The difference is that he learned not to jump with it. As you continue to practice this throughout your day, you'll begin to notice how much energy you have when you're not constantly carrying mental weight. How much more present you can be with people when you're not distracted by conversations that already ended. How much clearer your thinking becomes when your mental space isn't cluttered with old thoughts that have outlived their usefulness. The river keeps flowing whether we try to dam it up or not. Moments keep arising and passing whether we try to hold on to them or not. The question is whether you'll flow with this natural rhythm or exhaust yourself trying to make the current run backward. The older monk understood this natural flow. He acted when action was needed and then returned to stillness when the action was complete. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, you can practice this same wisdom. Let the conversations from today be complete. Let the decisions you made stand as they are. Let the worries about tomorrow exist in tomorrow, not in this moment. Set down the mental stones one by one, not because the concerns aren't real, but because carrying them through the night won't solve them. It will only steal your rest and cloud your clarity for tomorrow. Feel yourself becoming more like that mountain, stable, present, unshaken by passing mental weather. The thoughts can come and go like clouds across the sky of your awareness, but you remain centered, clear, at peace. This is your natural state when you're not mentally carrying what has already passed or what has not yet arrived. The older monk set the woman down at the river and walked on in peace. You can set down whatever you've been carrying and rest in the same kind of natural freedom. This moment is complete in itself. This breath is enough. This awareness, clear and spacious, is your true home. Even when you've learned to stop carrying others' emotions and to let go of mental stones from the day, there's often still something that keeps you awake at night, something that makes your mind spin with worry and planning. It's the deep need to know how things will turn out, the attachment to having life go according to your plans, the fear that if you don't control every variable, everything will fall apart. This is perhaps the most human of all struggles, the desire for certainty in an uncertain world. We make plans, set goals, work toward outcomes, and then suffer when reality takes a different path than the one we carefully mapped out. We form expectations about how people should behave, how situations should unfold, how our efforts should be rewarded, and then we're disappointed when life refuses to follow our script. There's a story that's been told for over 1,000 years about a farmer who lived in a small village near the mountains. One day, his only horse broke through the fence and ran away into the wild hills. All the neighbors came to express their sympathy. "What terrible luck," they said, shaking their heads in dismay. But the farmer simply looked at them with calm eyes and replied, "Maybe so, maybe not. We'll see." The next morning, the farmer woke to find that his horse had returned, and with it came 3 wild horses that had followed it back to the farm. The neighbors hurried over to celebrate this unexpected good fortune. "How wonderful," they exclaimed. "What amazing luck you have." Again, the farmer responded with the same quiet equanimity. "Maybe so, maybe not. We'll see." The following week, while trying to tame one of the wild horses, the farmer's son was thrown from its back and broke his leg badly. Once again, the neighbors gathered to offer their condolences. "How awful," they said. "Such misfortune after your recent good luck." The farmer helped his son into the house and then turned to his neighbors with the same peaceful expression. "Maybe so, maybe not. We'll see." A few days later, military officials came through the village, conscripting all the able-bodied young men to fight in a war that had broken out with a neighboring region. They took every healthy son from every family in the village, except for the farmer's boy, who was passed over because of his broken leg. The neighbors, now understanding the deeper wisdom they had witnessed, came to marvel at what seemed like incredible fortune. But the farmer, tending to his son's healing leg, simply nodded and said what he had always said: "Maybe so, maybe not. We'll see." This story illustrates one of the most profound teachings in all of Buddhist philosophy: the understanding that our immediate judgments about whether events are good or bad, fortunate or unfortunate, are often based on incomplete information. The farmer had learned to hold outcomes lightly, to engage fully with whatever arose without wasting energy, deciding whether reality was matching his preferences. The neighbors in the story represent how most of us move through life, constantly evaluating, constantly judging, constantly deciding whether what's happening should be celebrated or mourned. But this constant mental evaluation is exhausting, and it's often based on a very limited view of how events connect to each other over time. What looks like disaster in the moment may be redirection towards something better. What seems like good fortune may carry hidden challenges. The truth is, we rarely know in the moment what the larger meaning of an event will turn out to be. The farmer's wisdom wasn't indifference or passivity. He still cared for his animals, still worked his land, still tended to his son when he was injured. But he had learned something that most people never learn: how to participate fully in life without attaching his peace to specific outcomes. He engaged completely with what was in front of him while remaining open to whatever might unfold next. In Buddhist teaching, this is called non-attachment, and it's one of the most misunderstood concepts in spiritual practice. Non-attachment doesn't mean not caring. It doesn't mean becoming emotionally flat or withdrawing from life. It means caring deeply while holding outcomes lightly. It means giving your best effort while remaining unattached to whether that effort produces the results you expect. Think about something you've been really wanting to happen in your life right now. Maybe it's a job opportunity, a relationship development, a health improvement, or a personal goal you've been working toward. Notice how much mental energy you spend not just working on this outcome, but also worrying about whether it will happen, when it will happen, and what it will mean about you if it doesn't happen the way you want. All of that worry is like the neighbors in our story, constantly judging each development as good news or bad news. But what if you could approach your desires with the farmer's wisdom? You could still work toward what you want, still hope for positive outcomes, still take constructive action. But you could also cultivate the inner flexibility to trust that whatever unfolds will bring its own opportunities and lessons, even if they're not the ones you originally planned for. There was once a potter who had spent months creating what she believed would be her masterpiece, an intricate vase with delicate patterns that represented the culmination of years of skill development. The night before it was to be fired in the kiln, an earthquake shook her studio, and the unfired vase shattered into hundreds of pieces. She stood looking at the fragments, and her first impulse was to weep for all the lost work, all the destroyed beauty. But then she remembered something her teacher had once told her. The clay knows things the potter doesn't. Instead of mourning what was lost, she began to look more closely at how the vase had broken. The fracture patterns revealed structural weaknesses she hadn't noticed. The way the pieces separated showed her new possibilities for design. That broken vase became the inspiration for an entirely new technique that brought her more recognition and fulfillment than her original plan ever could have. This is what happens when we stop demanding that reality match our blueprints and start getting curious about what it's actually offering. The potter could have spent weeks mourning her broken vase, convinced that the earthquake had ruined everything. Instead, she practiced what Zen teachers call don't know mind, a state of open curiosity about how things will unfold, rather than rigid attachment to how they should unfold. Don't know mind doesn't mean being confused or uncertain. It means holding your plans and expectations lightly enough that you can recognize opportunities that don't match your original vision. It means being like a scientist who's genuinely interested in the results of an experiment, rather than someone who's already decided what the data should show. This shift in perspective is incredibly relaxing for the nervous system. When you're not constantly fighting with reality, when you're not pouring energy into resisting what's already happening, your body can finally release the chronic tension that comes from trying to control the uncontrollable. Your breathing deepens, your muscles soften, and your mind becomes available for the kind of creative response that's only possible when you're not locked into one way of seeing things. The Buddha taught that attachment to outcomes is one of the primary sources of human suffering. Not because wanting things is wrong, but because tying your peace to getting specific results sets you up for disappointment. Life is constantly changing, constantly surprising us, constantly offering us things we didn't expect, and withholding things we thought we needed. When your happiness depends on reality matching your preferences, you're essentially making a bet against the fundamental nature of existence. But when you learn to hold your desires the way the farmer held his judgments, lightly, with curiosity, with openness to whatever might actually be best, you begin to experience a different kind of freedom. You can still work toward your goals with passion and dedication. You can still hope for the best possible outcomes. But your peace no longer depends on getting exactly what you want, exactly when you want it. Consider the difference between these two approaches to the same situation. One person applies for a job they really want. They prepare thoroughly, interview well, and then spend weeks anxiously checking their email, unable to focus on anything else until they hear back. If they get the job, they're elated, but immediately start worrying about performing well. If they don't get it, they're devastated and take it as a sign that they're not good enough. Another person applies for the same kind of job with the same level of preparation and care. But after the interview, they return their attention to their current life, continuing to engage fully with their present circumstances while remaining open to whatever response comes. If they get the job, they're pleased and ready to engage with the new opportunity. If they don't get it, they trust that either something better is coming, or they have more to learn in their current situation. Their sense of worth and peace remains stable regardless of the outcome. Both people cared about the opportunity. Both people put in their best effort. But only one of them suffered during the waiting period, and only one of them would suffer if things didn't go according to plan. The difference wasn't in how much they cared, it was in how they held their caring. This is what the farmer understood that his neighbors didn't. You can be fully invested in life without being attached to life going according to your script. You can care deeply about outcomes without making your peace conditional on getting them. You can work wholeheartedly toward your goals while remaining open to the possibility that something even better might emerge from an unexpected direction. In a monastery garden, there once grew a tree that the monks had tended carefully for many years. They had a vision of how it should grow straight and tall, with branches reaching symmetrically toward the sky. But the tree had other ideas. It grew in a twisted, asymmetrical way that frustrated the monks who kept trying to guide it back to their ideal shape. One day, a master teacher visited the monastery and saw the monks struggling with their tree. "Why are you fighting with this tree?" he asked gently. "We're trying to help it grow properly," they explained. "But look how beautiful it already is," the teacher replied. "Its twisted trunk makes it strong in the wind. Its asymmetrical branches create interesting patterns of light and shadow. You've been so focused on your idea of how it should look that you've missed how beautiful it actually is." This story reveals how attachment to specific outcomes can blind us to the beauty and opportunities that are actually present in our lives. The monks weren't bad gardeners, they were loving caretakers who had a clear vision. But their attachment to that vision was preventing them from appreciating the unique beauty that was actually emerging. How often do we do this in our own lives? How often do we miss the gifts that are actually being offered because we're so focused on the gifts we think we should be receiving? How much beauty do we overlook because it doesn't match our preconceived notions of how our lives should unfold? The practice of releasing attachment to outcomes begins with recognizing how much energy you're currently putting into trying to control things that are ultimately beyond your control. You can control your effort, your attitude, your response to what happens. But you can't control other people's decisions, market conditions, timing, or the countless variables that determine how your efforts will be received by the world. When you try to control these uncontrollable factors, you create a constant state of tension in your nervous system. It's like trying to steer a boat by gripping the ocean itself instead of working with the wind and currents. The ocean will do what it does regardless of how tightly you grip it, but the gripping will exhaust you and make you less effective at actually navigating. Right now, as you're listening to these words, you might be able to feel some of that tension in your body. Maybe it's in your shoulders, where you've been carrying the weight of trying to make things happen on your timeline. Maybe it's in your jaw, clenched from the effort of trying to control outcomes through willpower. Maybe it's in your chest, tight from holding your breath while waiting for life to give you what you think you need. Take a moment to breathe into those tense places. Imagine releasing the grip you've been holding on your expectations. Not because you're giving up on your dreams, but because you're learning to hold them the way you would hold a butterfly, gently, with open hands, allowing it the freedom to land or fly as its nature dictates. This doesn't mean becoming passive or stopping your efforts toward meaningful goals. The farmer in our story didn't stop farming just because he couldn't control the weather. The potter didn't stop making ceramics just because one piece broke. They continued to engage fully with their work, while remaining unattached to having that work produce only the results they originally envisioned. There's a beautiful paradox in this teaching. When you stop being attached to specific outcomes, you often become more effective at achieving positive results. This happens because non-attachment frees up the mental and emotional energy that was being consumed by worry, control, and resistance. That energy becomes available for creativity, intuition, and responsive action. Non-attachment also makes you more resilient when things don't go according to plan. Instead of seeing setbacks as failures, you begin to see them as information. Instead of wasting energy on disappointment, you can quickly redirect your efforts toward new possibilities. Instead of taking unexpected outcomes personally, you can remain curious about what they might be pointing you toward. The farmer's repeated response, "Maybe so, maybe not, we'll see," represents a profound trust in the unfolding of life. It's not fatalism or resignation. It's an active faith that reality often knows things we don't. It's the wisdom to recognize that our perspective is always limited, our timeline is always impatient, and our preferences are often based on incomplete information. As you practice holding your desires more lightly, you might notice that your relationship with time begins to change. When you're not constantly trying to force outcomes to happen on your schedule, you can settle into the natural rhythm of how things actually unfold. You become less rushed, less anxious about timing, more able to appreciate the process rather than fixating on the destination. This shift also transforms how you relate to other people. When you stop needing them to behave in specific ways for you to be happy, you can love them more freely. When you release your attachment to how they should respond to your efforts, you can give more generously. When you stop trying to control their choices, you can enjoy their company without the underlying tension of unmet expectations. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, you can practice this same wisdom with your own life. Instead of lying awake worrying about whether your efforts will produce the results you want, you can trust that whatever unfolds will carry its own gifts and opportunities. Instead of trying to mentally control tomorrow's events, you can rest in the understanding that your job is to show up fully for whatever tomorrow actually brings. Feel yourself relaxing into this trust, the way the farmer relaxed into his "maybe so, maybe not." Your dreams and goals can remain important to you without controlling you. Your hopes can remain alive without making you anxious. Your efforts can remain wholehearted without attachment to their outcomes being exactly what you expect. This is the freedom that comes from working with life instead of against it. This is the peace that emerges when you stop demanding that reality, submit to your preferences, and start dancing with whatever music is actually playing. Like the farmer watching his story unfold with patient curiosity, you can meet each day with open hands and an open heart, ready for whatever lessons and gifts it might bring. The horse runs away, the horse returns, the sun breaks his leg, the war passes by, and through it all, there's a deeper stillness that remains unshaken by the changing circumstances. That stillness is always available to you when you stop insisting that life follow your script and start trusting the wisdom of what's actually unfolding. Maybe so, maybe not. We'll see. Even when you've learned to stop carrying others' emotions, to release mental reactivity, and to hold outcomes lightly, there's often still something that weighs on your heart in the quiet moments before sleep. It's the echo of things that already happened, words you wish you hadn't said, chances you wish you'd taken, moments you replay over and over with the futile hope that somehow, if you think about them enough, you might be able to change how they unfolded. There's an ancient story about a monk who was sweeping the temple courtyard one autumn morning when his broom struck a small pebble. The stone flew through the air and hit a piece of dried bamboo with a clear, resonant sound that seemed to hang in the air longer than such a simple strike should have. In that moment, hearing that pure tone, the monk experienced a profound awakening about the nature of time and memory. Later, when other monks asked him to explain what had happened in that moment of insight, he said simply, "The stone taught me that the past cannot be changed, but its echo can either disturb our peace or awaken our wisdom. The sound was beautiful not because I could hold on to it, but because I could let it complete itself and fade away naturally." This teaching points to something we all struggle with: how to relate to parts of our past that still feel unfinished, unresolved, or painful. Maybe it's words you wish you hadn't spoken to someone you loved. Maybe it's opportunities you let slip by because fear held you back. Maybe it's decisions you made that you now see differently with the wisdom you've gained since then. These memories can echo through your present moments, like that sound of stone striking bamboo, but the question is whether that echo will disturb your peace or contribute to your understanding. The Buddhist perspective on time is very different from how most people think about their past. While our minds often live in memories or project into imagined futures, reality only exists in this present moment. The conversation you regret happened in a moment that no longer exists anywhere except in your memory. The opportunity you missed existed in a time that has already passed and cannot be retrieved. The person you were when you made that decision was operating with different information, different wisdom, different circumstances than you have now. This doesn't mean dismissing or minimizing real pain from past experiences. It means recognizing that the suffering you feel now isn't actually coming from the past event itself. It's coming from your present moment relationship with the memory of that event. And that relationship can change, just like the monk's relationship with the sound of the stone changed from a simple noise into a doorway to wisdom. There was once a woman who carried deep regret about harsh words she had spoken to her mother during their last conversation before her mother passed away. For months, she replayed that final exchange, wishing she could take back what she'd said, wishing she'd been more patient, more loving. The weight of this regret was stealing her sleep and clouding every happy memory she had of her mother with sadness. One day, she shared her burden with a wise teacher who listened with great compassion. When she finished speaking, the teacher asked gently, "Tell me, when you remember your mother now, are you remembering her, or are you remembering your guilt about that last conversation?" The woman paused, realizing that her regret had become so strong it was actually blocking her from accessing the love that had defined their relationship for decades. The teacher continued, "Your mother knew who you were in your heart. One difficult moment doesn't erase 30 years of love. But your attachment to that one moment is erasing your ability to feel the love that's still here, still real, still available to you." This story illustrates something crucial about how regret operates in our minds. When we become attached to wishing the past were different, we often lose access to what was actually beautiful about our relationships and experiences. The regret becomes so loud that it drowns out the love, the joy, the connection that formed the foundation of what we're grieving. The Buddha taught that suffering comes not from what happened, but from our attachment to wishing it had happened differently. This attachment to changing the unchangeable is like trying to make a river flow backward. It's futile, and it prevents us from working skillfully with the water that's actually flowing in the present moment. But how do you actually release regret when it feels so justified, so important, so much like a necessary form of honoring what was lost? The first step is understanding the difference between healthy remorse and destructive regret. Healthy remorse acknowledges a mistake, learns from it, and then uses that learning to make better choices going forward. Destructive regret keeps replaying the mistake without any constructive purpose, creating suffering in the present without changing anything about the past. Right now, think about something from your past that still weighs on your heart. Notice how it feels in your body when you remember it. Is there a tightness in your chest? A heaviness in your stomach? A tension in your shoulders? These physical sensations are happening now, in this moment, even though the event you're remembering happened in the past. The past event is over, but your present moment relationship with the memory of it is creating real suffering right now. In a mountain monastery, there was an old monk who had been carrying guilt for over 20 years about a mistake he'd made as a young novice. He had accidentally broken a precious statue that had been in the temple for centuries, and despite the forgiveness of his teachers and community, he continued to punish himself for that moment of carelessness. One evening, as he sat in meditation, still tormented by this ancient regret, he heard the sound of a clay pot falling and shattering in the kitchen. Instead of continuing his meditation, he went to see what had happened and found a young monk standing amid the fragments, tears streaming down his face. "I'm so sorry, elder brother," the young monk said. "I've ruined everything. I'll never forgive myself for being so clumsy." Looking at this young monk's pain, the elder suddenly saw his own 20 years of self-punishment with startling clarity. He realized that his attachment to his past mistake hadn't honored the broken statue or made him a better monk. It had simply created 2 decades of unnecessary suffering. In that moment, he felt both his own regret and his compassion for the young monk dissolve into a deeper understanding. "Brother," he said gently, kneeling to help gather the fragments, "this pot served its purpose beautifully until this moment. Now its purpose is complete, and ours is to clean up mindfully and continue serving with whatever pots remain. The pot doesn't need our guilt to honor what it gave us. It needs our gratitude and our attention to what's still here to be cared for." This teaching reveals something profound about the nature of guilt and regret. We often think that continuing to feel bad about past mistakes is a way of honoring what was damaged or showing respect for what was lost. But guilt doesn't resurrect broken statues or repair damaged relationships. It only creates more suffering in the present moment, while blocking our ability to serve life more skillfully going forward. The monk's realization points to what Buddhist teachers call the difference between holy remorse and neurotic guilt. Holy remorse feels the genuine sadness of a mistake, learns whatever lessons are available, and then channels that learning into more conscious action. Neurotic guilt replays the mistake endlessly without any constructive purpose, like a broken record that can't move on to the next song. One of the most liberating insights in Buddhist practice is recognizing that the person who made that past mistake was not exactly the same person you are now. You've learned things since then, grown in wisdom, developed new capacities for compassion and awareness. The version of you that exists in this moment has insights and skills that weren't available to the version of you who made that decision in the past. This doesn't excuse harmful actions or eliminate the importance of making amends when possible. It simply recognizes that identity is fluid, that people grow and change, and that holding your current self hostage for the actions of a previous version of yourself often prevents the very growth that would help you avoid similar mistakes in the future. Consider the woman grieving her last conversation with her mother. The person who spoke those harsh words was someone under stress, perhaps tired, perhaps triggered by old patterns that she hadn't yet learned to recognize. The person feeling regret now has different awareness, different perspective, different capacity for patience. Continuing to punish her current self for her past self's limitations doesn't honor her mother's memory. It blocks her from accessing the love that was the true foundation of their relationship. There's another story about a master calligrapher who made a terrible mistake while creating an important piece for the emperor. Instead of starting over or trying to cover up the error, he incorporated the mistake into the design, turning it into the most beautiful element of the entire piece. When asked how he had transformed an error into art, he replied, "I stopped fighting with what had already been written and started working with what was actually on the page." This is one of the most practical teachings about dealing with regret. You can't erase what's already been written in the story of your life, but you can choose how to work with what's actually on the page. You can let past mistakes become sources of wisdom, compassion, and humility. You can allow the pain of regret to soften your heart toward others who are struggling with their own imperfections. Many people find that their deepest regrets, when finally released, become the foundation of their greatest compassion. The parent who was too harsh with their children becomes an advocate for gentle parenting. The person who was judgmental in their youth becomes a source of acceptance for others' struggles. The one who made selfish choices learns to give more generously. The regret, when transformed through understanding rather than prolonged through guilt, becomes a teacher rather than a tormentor. But what about situations where you can't make direct amends? What about regrets involving people who have died, relationships that have ended, or opportunities that can never return? In these cases, the practice becomes one of what Buddhists call merit dedication, taking the lessons learned from your regret and using them to serve life more skillfully in whatever ways are available to you now. The woman who regretted her last conversation with her mother could honor that regret by becoming more patient with other people in her life. The monk who broke the statue could let his mistake teach him to move more mindfully through the world. The opportunities you didn't take could become wisdom that helps you recognize and embrace the opportunities that are still coming your way. This transformation of regret into wisdom requires a fundamental shift in how you relate to your past mistakes. Instead of seeing them as evidence of your unworthiness or permanent character flaws, you begin to see them as part of your education in being human. Instead of using them to justify ongoing self-punishment, you let them teach you how to love more skillfully, act more consciously, and respond more wisely to whatever challenges arise in the present. Right now, as you're listening to these words, you might notice that some of the physical tension you are holding around your regrets has begun to soften. This happens naturally when you stop using your energy to fight with what's already written and start using it to write what comes next. The nervous system can finally relax when it's no longer trying to change the unchangeable. There's a beautiful practice in Zen tradition called just sitting with what is. When regret arises, instead of immediately trying to fix it, analyze it, or push it away, you simply sit with it. You feel the sadness without trying to justify it. You acknowledge the mistake without adding layers of self-judgment. You let the regret be present without letting it define who you are in this moment. Often, when regret is met with this kind of gentle awareness instead of resistance or self-attack, it naturally transforms. The guilt dissolves into sadness, the sadness releases into acceptance, and the acceptance opens into compassion, both for yourself and for others who are carrying similar burdens. This doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't mean you'll never feel sad about past mistakes again. It means you stop adding unnecessary suffering to inevitable sadness. You let the natural grief of human imperfection flow through you without creating a permanent residence for guilt and self-punishment. As you prepare for rest tonight, you can practice this gentle awareness with whatever regrets you've been carrying. Instead of trying to resolve them once and for all, you can simply acknowledge them with the same compassion you would offer a friend who was struggling with similar feelings. You can honor what was lost or damaged without demanding that your present moment peace be sacrificed on the altar of unchangeable past events. Feel the echo of that stone striking bamboo, clear, complete, naturally fading into silence. Your past experiences can echo through your awareness in the same way, offering their lessons without demanding that you live forever in their shadow. The sound completes itself and fades, and in that fading, space opens for whatever wants to arise next. Tonight, let your regrets complete themselves like that sound completing itself. Let them offer their wisdom, and then fade into the spaciousness of this present moment, where your life is still being written, where your love can still be expressed, where your learning can still serve the world in ways that honor both what was lost and what remains possible. The past has taught you what it came to teach. Now let it rest, so that you can rest too, knowing that the person you've become through your mistakes is more compassionate, more wise, more deeply human than the person you would have been without them. This is the gift that regret offers when it's finally allowed to transform from burden into teacher, from weight into wisdom. After you've learned to release what doesn't belong to you, to stop carrying mental stones from the day, to hold outcomes lightly, and to make peace with what's already written in your story, something else begins to emerge from underneath all that effort and holding on. It's not something you have to create, or achieve, or work toward. It's something that was always there, waiting beneath the noise, like a clear lake that becomes visible only when you stop throwing stones into the water. This is the discovery of your natural stillness, not the forced quiet that comes from suppressing your thoughts, not the temporary peace that depends on perfect external conditions, but the deep, unshakable calm that is your mind's true nature when it's not constantly reacting to everything that arises. There's a story told in the mountains of Tibet about a young student who came to her teacher in great frustration. "Master," she said, "I've been trying to meditate for months, but my mind is like a wild horse that refuses to be tamed. The harder I try to make it still, the more it seems to buck and fight. How do I force my thoughts to be quiet?" The teacher led her to a window that looked out over a vast mountain range. "Tell me," she said gently, "when clouds move across the face of that mountain, does the mountain struggle to push them away? Does it fight with each cloud that passes over its peak?" The student looked out at the serene landscape and shook her head. "No, the mountain just remains still while the clouds pass by." "And yet," the teacher continued, "does the mountain become less of a mountain because clouds cross its face? Is it diminished when weather moves through the sky above it?" Again, the student shook her head. "The mountain remains exactly what it is, completely unaffected by whatever passes over it." The teacher smiled with infinite patience. "Your awareness is like that mountain. Thoughts arise and pass like clouds, emotions move through like weather patterns, but the awareness that notices them remains unchanging, unshaken, naturally still. You don't need to fight the clouds. You only need to remember that you are the mountain, not the weather." This teaching points to something revolutionary about the nature of meditation and inner peace. Most people approach stillness like they're trying to create something that doesn't exist, when actually they're trying to uncover something that's always been there. Your natural stillness isn't something you manufacture through effort. It's what remains when you stop adding layers of reaction, resistance, and mental commentary to whatever arises in your experience. In Buddhist understanding, this awareness that remains constant beneath all changing experiences is what we truly are. The thoughts come and go, the emotions rise and fall, the sensations appear and disappear, but the awareness that witnesses all of this remains steady, clear, and naturally peaceful. When you begin to identify more with this witnessing awareness than with the changing content of your experience, you discover a kind of peace that doesn't depend on anything external being a particular way. Think about it this way. Right now, as you're listening to these words, there's a part of you that's aware of the sound of the voice, aware of any thoughts that arise in response, aware of how your body feels, aware of the space around you. That awareness itself isn't struggling or grasping or trying to be different than it is. It's simply present, spacious, naturally calm. This is what meditation helps you recognize and rest in more consistently. But many people misunderstand what meditation is supposed to accomplish. They sit down expecting to achieve a state of no thoughts, or to feel blissful, or to solve their problems through spiritual practice. When their minds continue to generate thoughts, when difficult emotions arise, when they don't feel immediately peaceful, they conclude that they're doing it wrong. There was once a monk who sat by a muddy pond every day, trying to make the water clear through the force of his concentration. He would stare at the murky water, willing it to become transparent, growing more frustrated each day when his efforts seemed to have no effect. Other monks would pass by and see him sitting there, his face tense with effort, his body rigid with trying. One morning, an older monk sat down beside him. "Brother," he said kindly, "what are you doing here?" The younger monk explained his daily practice of trying to clear the water through concentration. The elder nodded thoughtfully and then said, "Watch what happens when you simply stop stirring the mud." For the first time in months, the younger monk stopped trying to actively clear the water and simply sat quietly beside the pond. Within minutes, the particles that had been churning in the water began to settle on their own. The water gradually became clear and still, not through any effort on his part, but simply because he had stopped disturbing it. This is exactly how meditation works with the mind. The clarity and stillness you're seeking aren't created by your effort. They're revealed when you stop stirring up mental activity through constant reaction and resistance. When you sit quietly and simply witness whatever arises without trying to change it, fix it, or make it go away, your natural stillness gradually becomes apparent. The key word here is gradually. Just as the muddy water doesn't become crystal clear in an instant, your mind doesn't usually settle into deep stillness immediately. There might be days when sitting quietly feels impossible, when your thoughts seem louder than ever, when emotions feel overwhelming. This doesn't mean you're failing at meditation. It often means you're finally becoming aware of mental activity that was already there but that you hadn't been noticing. In Zen practice, there's a beautiful saying, "You are perfect as you are, and you could use a little improvement." This seemingly contradictory statement points to something important about spiritual practice. Your essential nature, that awareness that witnesses everything, is already complete, already peaceful, already whole. But your habits of mind, your patterns of reaction, your ways of relating to experience, can definitely be refined and improved. Meditation isn't about becoming someone different than you already are. It's about becoming more familiar with who you already are beneath all the mental activity. It's like cleaning dust off a mirror. The mirror's capacity to reflect clearly was always there, but the dust was obscuring it. Your natural stillness is like that mirror's reflective nature, always present, sometimes hidden, but never actually damaged or lost. This understanding can be incredibly relieving for people who have struggled with meditation or who feel like they're not spiritual enough to access deep peace. You don't need to be in a monastery. You don't need to sit in perfect posture for hours. You don't need to have profound mystical experiences. You only need to practice recognizing the stillness that's already here, like learning to notice the sky behind the clouds. Right now, even as your mind might be generating thoughts about what you're hearing, there's a deeper stillness that's aware of those thoughts. Even if emotions are present, there's a calm awareness that notices those emotions without being overwhelmed by them. Even if your body feels restless or uncomfortable, there's a spacious presence that can hold that restlessness with patience and kindness. This is what Buddhist teachers mean when they talk about non-dual awareness, the recognition that you are not separate from the peace you're seeking. You are the peace, temporarily confused about your own nature, like the sky temporarily forgetting that it's not actually made of clouds. In a forest monastery, there was a meditation hall where students would sit for hours in silence. One student noticed that there was always a barely audible humming sound in the hall, so subtle that she only became aware of it during the deepest moments of quiet. At first, she found it distracting and wondered what was causing it. Over time, she realized that the humming had always been there, She had simply been too caught up in louder mental noise to hear it. One day, she asked her teacher about this background sound. The teacher smiled and said, "That's the sound of the building settling, the air moving, life itself breathing. It was always there, but your mind had to become quiet enough to notice it. This is how it is with your natural stillness. It's always humming in the background of your experience, but you have to become still enough to hear it." This analogy beautifully captures how discovering your natural stillness actually works. It's not about creating something new, but about becoming quiet enough to notice what was always there. The stillness isn't hiding from you. You've just been too busy to feel it. It's not absent during difficult times. You've just been too caught up in the difficulty to remember it's there. The practice, then, becomes very simple. Instead of trying to force your mind into stillness, you learn to rest in the awareness that's already still. Instead of fighting with thoughts and emotions when they arise, you practice remaining as the spacious awareness that can hold them all without being disturbed. Instead of seeking peak experiences or special states, you learn to appreciate the ordinary miracle of consciousness itself. This shift from doing meditation to being meditation is one of the most important transitions in spiritual practice. When you're doing meditation, you're using techniques to try to achieve certain states. When you're being meditation, you're simply resting in your natural state of aware presence. Both approaches have their place, but being meditation is where the deepest peace is found. As you're listening right now, you can experiment with this being meditation. Instead of trying to concentrate on these words or control your thoughts about them, simply rest in the awareness that's already here, already listening, already present. Notice how this awareness doesn't strain or struggle or try to be anywhere other than where it is. It's naturally relaxed, naturally open, naturally still. This is what the mountain in our earlier story represents. Not a cold, dead stillness, but a vibrant, alive presence that remains unshaken while allowing all of life to move through and around it. Your natural stillness has this same quality. It's not the stillness of a rock, but the stillness of space itself, infinitely open, completely allowing, totally at peace with whatever appears within it. When you begin to rest more consistently in this natural stillness, several things start to happen. First, you become less reactive to external circumstances because you're less identified with the mental and emotional reactions that arise. You still feel emotions, but you don't become them. You still have thoughts, but you don't become lost in them. You remain centered in the stillness while allowing everything else to come and go freely. Second, you develop what Buddhists call equanimity, a kind of balanced responsiveness to life that doesn't swing between extremes of elation and despair. From the perspective of natural stillness, both pleasant and unpleasant experiences are seen as temporary weather patterns moving through the sky of awareness. You can appreciate the beautiful ones without clinging to them, and endure the difficult ones without being overwhelmed by them. Third, you begin to trust yourself in a deeper way. When you know that there's a place of stillness within you that can't be damaged by external circumstances, you feel more confident about facing whatever life brings. You stop looking to the outside world to provide you with peace because you've discovered the peace that's built into your very nature. There's an old Zen story about a student who asked her teacher, "How do I maintain this stillness when I leave the meditation hall and go back into the busy world?" The teacher replied, "Do you think the sky stops being the sky when it's full of clouds? Does space become less spacious when it's filled with objects? Your stillness doesn't disappear when your life gets busy. You just forget to notice it's there." This is perhaps the most practical teaching about natural stillness. It's always available, regardless of what's happening around you or within you. The mother caring for a crying baby can access it. The person dealing with work stress can find it. The individual facing illness or loss can rest in it. It's not dependent on external, quiet, or perfect circumstances. It's the background of all experience, as available in chaos as it is in silence. As you feel this understanding settling into your body, you might notice that your breathing has naturally slowed and deepened. This happens spontaneously when you stop trying to control your experience and start resting in the awareness that's already at peace with whatever is arising. Your nervous system recognizes this as a return to your natural state and begins to relax accordingly. Tonight, as you prepare for sleep, you can practice resting in this natural stillness. Instead of trying to make your mind empty or force yourself to feel peaceful, you can simply notice the awareness that's already here, already at rest, already complete. Let your thoughts come and go like clouds across the sky of your consciousness. Let your emotions rise and fall like waves on the ocean of your being. And rest in the knowing that you are not the clouds or the waves. You are the sky and the ocean, vast, still, and completely at peace with whatever moves through you. This natural stillness is your birthright, your true nature, the ground of your being. It doesn't need to be earned or achieved or maintained through constant effort. It only needs to be remembered, like the mountain remembering that it remains unmoved while clouds pass over its peaks. You are that mountain, and your peace is as natural and unshakable as stone reaching towards sky. In this stillness, there's no problem to solve, no state to achieve, no person to become. There's only this awareness, aware of itself, consciousness resting in its own nature, the simplest and most profound thing in existence. This is what you've been seeking in all your searching, and it was never farther away than your next breath, your next moment of simply being present to what is. Now that you've discovered the natural stillness that remains constant beneath all changing experiences, you might wonder what to do when powerful emotions arise that seem to disturb that peace. What happens when anger burns through your awareness like wildfire, or when grief feels so heavy it seems to crush the very stillness you've worked to cultivate? What do you do with the intensity of fear, the overwhelming nature of sadness, or even the desperate quality that sometimes accompanies great joy? The beautiful truth that Buddhist wisdom reveals is that these emotions aren't enemies of your peace. They're energy that can be transformed and channeled, like fire that can either burn down a house or warm a home, depending on how skillfully it's tended. In a monastery nestled deep in the mountains, there was a monk whose job was to tend the sacred fire that burned continuously in the main temple. This fire provided warmth during the harsh winters, light during the dark hours, and heat for cooking the community's simple meals. But fire, as the monk learned, required constant attention and skill to remain beneficial rather than destructive. One day, a young novice asked him, "Brother, how do you keep the fire from burning too hot and consuming everything, yet prevent it from growing so weak that it provides no warmth?" The monk smiled and gestured toward the carefully arranged logs. "I don't try to eliminate the fire's nature," he said. "Fire wants to burn. That's what makes it fire. But I can choose what fuel to give it, when to provide more air, and when to let it settle into glowing coals. The fire's energy remains the same, but how I work with that energy determines whether it serves life or destroys it." This is exactly how Buddhist practice approaches emotions. Emotions are not problems to be solved or states to be eliminated. They're energy moving through your system, and like fire, this energy can be incredibly beneficial when it's understood and skillfully directed. The goal isn't to become emotionless, it's to become emotionally wise. Most people relate to their emotions in one of two unhelpful ways. Either they suppress them, trying to push down feelings that seem inappropriate or uncomfortable, or they become completely identified with them, letting emotions drive their actions without any conscious direction. But there's a third way, the way of the fire tender, acknowledging the energy while choosing how to work with it. Take anger, for example. In many spiritual traditions, anger is seen as something to be eliminated, a sign of spiritual failure or lack of compassion. But in Buddhist understanding, anger often carries important information. It might be pointing to a boundary that's been crossed, an injustice that needs addressing, or a value that's being threatened. The fire of anger isn't wrong, but how you tend that fire makes all the difference. There was once a meditation teacher who noticed that one of her students seemed to be suppressing all of his emotional responses. He sat in meditation with perfect posture, spoke in measured tones, and never showed any signs of disturbance. But there was something lifeless about his presence, as if he had traded his humanity for an artificial calm. One day, during a community work period, another student accidentally knocked over this man's carefully organized tools. Instead of the expected anger, the man simply smiled and said, "No problem at all," but his hands were shaking and his jaw was visibly clenched. The teacher approached him gently. "What happened to your anger?" she asked. "I got rid of it," he replied proudly. "I don't get angry anymore." The teacher looked at him with compassion. "You haven't gotten rid of your anger," she said kindly. "You've just stopped the fire from reaching the surface. But look at your hands, feel your jaw. The fire is still burning. It's just burning underground, where it can't warm anyone, but it can still burn you from the inside." This story points to something crucial about emotional health in spiritual practice. Suppressing emotions doesn't make them disappear. It just drives them deeper into your system, where they can create tension, illness, and psychological rigidity. True emotional wisdom involves feeling your emotions fully while choosing your responses consciously. When anger arises, instead of immediately reacting or immediately suppressing, you can practice what Buddhist teachers call the sacred pause. You feel the heat of the emotion, you acknowledge its presence, you let it move through your body without either feeding it with mental stories or pushing it away with spiritual concepts. In that pause, you can ask yourself, what is this anger trying to tell me? What action, if any, would be most helpful here? How can I use this energy in service of clarity rather than confusion? Often, when anger is met with this kind of conscious attention, it transforms naturally. The heat remains, but it becomes fuel for clear communication, appropriate boundary setting, or compassionate action toward injustice. The fire doesn't get extinguished. It gets channeled into something that serves life rather than destroying it. The same principle applies to all emotions. Grief, when it's allowed to move through you without resistance, doesn't just process loss. It opens your heart to deeper compassion for all beings who experience pain. Fear, when it's felt fully without being dramatized, often contains valuable information about real dangers that need attention or false beliefs that need questioning. Even joy, when it's not clung to desperately, becomes a natural expression of gratitude that enhances your connection to life. In another temple, there was a monk who had been practicing meditation for many years, but found himself becoming increasingly numb to his emotional life. He came to his teacher concerned that his practice was making him less human, less capable of feeling deeply about anything. The teacher listened carefully and then took him to the temple garden, where a small stream flowed between carefully placed stones. "Tell me," the teacher said, "is this stream more beautiful when it flows smoothly over these flat stones, or when it encounters the larger rocks and creates rapids and small waterfalls?" The monk considered the question. "Both have their beauty," he said, "but the rapids seem more alive, more dynamic." The teacher nodded. "Your emotions are like those rapids. They show that your heart is encountering the obstacles and opportunities of life, that you're engaged rather than detached. The goal isn't to eliminate the rapids, it's to let them flow skillfully without damaging the banks." This teaching beautifully illustrates the difference between healthy detachment and emotional numbness. Healthy detachment allows you to feel emotions fully without being controlled by them. Emotional numbness tries to avoid feeling anything difficult, which usually also deadens your capacity for joy, love, and authentic connection. The practice of transforming emotional fire requires developing what psychologists call emotional regulation and what Buddhist teachers call skillful means. This involves several key elements. First, developing the capacity to stay present with intense emotions without either being overwhelmed by them or pushing them away. Second, learning to distinguish between the raw energy of emotion and the mental stories that often amplify that energy unnecessarily. And third, cultivating the wisdom to channel emotional energy into responses that serve your deepest values rather than your immediate impulses. Right now, think of an emotion that you typically struggle with. Maybe it's anxiety that seems to spiral out of control, or sadness that feels too heavy to bear, or anger that erupts before you can catch it. Instead of thinking about how to get rid of this emotion, consider what it might be like to work with it the way the monk worked with fire, not eliminating its essential nature, but learning to tend it skillfully. For instance, anxiety often contains the energy of care and concern. When it's overwhelming, that caring energy becomes scattered and unproductive. But when it's channeled skillfully, that same energy can become thoughtful preparation, mindful attention to important details, or compassionate concern for others' well-being. The anxious energy doesn't disappear. It gets focused in ways that actually serve the caring that underlies it. There's a meditation practice that some Buddhist teachers use specifically for working with difficult emotions. When a strong emotion arises, instead of immediately trying to calm it or analyze it, you breathe into it. You literally send your breath toward the place in your body where you feel the emotion most intensely. This isn't trying to breathe the emotion away. It's offering your breath as a kind of spaciousness that can hold the emotion without being overwhelmed by it. As you breathe with the emotion, you might notice that it has its own natural rhythm, its own lifespan. Emotions, like waves, have a natural tendency to rise, peak, and subside if they're not interfered with. When you neither suppress them nor feed them with dramatic stories, they often transform themselves, revealing wisdom or moving into different emotional territories entirely. One of the most profound discoveries in working with emotions this way is realizing that you are not your emotions. You are the awareness that experiences emotions, just as you are the sky that experiences weather. The sadness moves through you, but you are not made of sadness. The anger arises in you, but you are not essentially angry. This recognition allows you to feel emotions fully without losing your center, to be moved by life without being controlled by every emotional impulse. This doesn't mean becoming cold or distant from your emotional life. Actually, it often means becoming more emotionally available and authentic because you're no longer afraid of what you might feel. When you know that you can handle any emotion that arises, not by suppressing it, but by meeting it with conscious awareness, you become more willing to open your heart to the full spectrum of human experience. There's another story about a potter who was known for creating vessels of extraordinary beauty and strength. When asked about her secret, she explained that the most beautiful pottery came from clay that had been worked while it was still warm and malleable. "If I try to shape cold, hardened clay," she said, "it cracks and breaks. But if I work with the clay, while it's warm from the kiln, while it still has life in it, I can create something that's both beautiful and durable." Emotions are like that warm clay. When they first arise, they're malleable, workable, full of potential. If you try to shape them through force or ignore them until they harden into resentment, bitterness, or numbness, they become much more difficult to work with. But if you meet them while they're still warm, still alive with energy, you can shape them into responses that serve your highest intentions. This requires developing what might be called emotional courage, the willingness to feel what you actually feel rather than what you think you should feel. Many people spend enormous amounts of energy trying to feel grateful when they're actually sad, trying to feel confident when they're actually afraid, trying to feel peaceful when they're actually angry. This emotional pretending exhausts the nervous system and prevents the genuine processing that allows emotions to transform naturally. True emotional courage means being honest about what's actually arising in your experience and then choosing how to work with that raw material skillfully. If you're angry, you start by acknowledging the anger rather than immediately trying to transform it into compassion. If you're sad, you feel the sadness rather than rushing to find the silver lining. This honest acknowledgement creates the foundation for genuine transformation rather than spiritual bypassing. As you practice this approach to emotional life, you might notice that your relationships with others begin to change. When you're no longer afraid of your own emotions, you become less reactive to other people's emotional expressions. When you know how to tend your own emotional fire skillfully, you can be present with others' emotional fires without getting burned or trying to extinguish them. You become like a spacious hearth that can hold many different fires safely. You also might find that you become more emotionally authentic and therefore more trustworthy to others. People can sense when someone is comfortable with the full range of human feeling, and they naturally feel safer being authentic themselves in such presence. Your willingness to feel deeply becomes an invitation for others to do the same. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, you can practice this gentle approach to whatever emotions might be present. If there's anxiety about tomorrow, instead of trying to think it away, you can breathe with it, acknowledge its concern, and thank it for caring about your well-being. If there's sadness about something that happened today, you can let it move through you like water through a riverbed, knowing that sadness is how the heart processes loss and disappointment. If there's anger about an injustice or frustration about a situation, you can feel the heat of that fire while choosing not to feed it with obsessive thinking. If there's joy about something beautiful you experienced, you can let it glow warmly in your chest without grasping it or demanding that it last forever. Each emotion that arises is like a visitor to your inner temple. You don't have to invite it to stay forever, but you also don't need to throw it out immediately. You can greet it, listen to what it has to tell you, offer it the warmth of your conscious attention, and then let it move on naturally when its message has been delivered. This is the art of transforming emotional fire, not extinguishing the flame, but learning to tend it with such skill that it becomes a source of warmth, light, and energy rather than destruction. Your emotions become allies in your awakening rather than obstacles to your peace. And your heart becomes both more open and more wise, capable of feeling deeply while responding skillfully to whatever life brings. The fire burns on, but now it burns in service of love, wisdom, and authentic presence. This is the gift that emotions offer when they're met with conscious awareness rather than automatic reaction. They become the very energy that illuminates your path forward. Even after you've learned to transform emotional fire into wisdom, there's often still something that keeps you separate from the full experience of peace and connection. It's the walls you've built around your heart over the years, invisible barriers constructed from old hurts, disappointments, and betrayals that were meant to protect you, but now keep out not just pain, but also joy, love, and the very intimacy your soul craves. These walls weren't built in a day, and they usually had very good reasons for existing. Maybe someone you trusted broke your heart when you were young. Maybe you opened yourself completely to a relationship that ended in betrayal. Maybe you shared your deepest dreams with someone who laughed at them, or offered your authentic self to people who rejected what they saw. Each hurt became another stone in the wall, another layer of protection between your tender heart and a world that sometimes handles tender things roughly. But what you built for protection has become a prison. The same walls that keep out potential pain also keep out potential beauty. The same guards that protect you from being hurt again also prevent you from being fully loved, fully seen, fully alive in your connections with others. There's a story told in Zen circles about a master gardener who inherited a magnificent garden that had been surrounded by a high stone wall. The previous owner had built the wall, after deer had repeatedly destroyed his prized flowers. For years, the garden had been safe from any creatures that might damage the plants. But when the new gardener arrived, he found that while the flowers were indeed protected, they had also become weak and pale from lack of natural interaction with the world around them. More troubling, the wall had not only kept the deer out, it had also kept out the butterflies that pollinated the flowers, the birds that spread seeds for new growth, and the gentle rains that nourished the soil. The garden was safe, but it was slowly dying from isolation. The gardener realized he faced a choice: keep the walls and watch his garden wither in safety, or gradually lower them and trust that the garden's natural vitality would help it handle whatever challenges arose. This is the choice your heart faces every day. You can continue to live behind the protective walls you've built, staying safe from potential hurt, but also cut off from the nourishment that comes from genuine connection. Or you can begin the gradual, courageous work of opening those walls, not recklessly, not naively, but with the wisdom that comes from understanding that a heart that never risks being hurt is a heart that never fully lives. Buddhist teaching speaks beautifully about this balance between wisdom and openness. The Buddha himself spoke of having a heart like the sky, vast enough to hold all experiences, both pleasant and painful, without being damaged by any of them. This doesn't mean being vulnerable to everyone about everything. It means developing the inner spaciousness to remain open-hearted even when you encounter people or situations that aren't safe for your full transparency. The key insight here is understanding the difference between being protected and being defended. Protection comes from wisdom, discernment, and healthy boundaries. Defense comes from fear, reactivity, and the attempt to control others' responses to you. A protected heart can choose when and how to open based on what's appropriate in each situation. A defended heart operates from automatic patterns of closing that often have little to do with present circumstances. Consider how differently these approaches feel in your body. When you're operating from protection, there's a sense of groundedness, of conscious choice about how much to reveal or share. When you're operating from defense, there's usually tension, a sense of bracing against potential attack, a readiness to fight or flee that keeps your nervous system in a state of chronic alert. Right now, as you're listening to these words, you might be able to feel some of those defensive patterns in your body. Maybe it's a subtle hardening around your heart when you think about someone who hurt you. Maybe it's a tightness in your throat when you imagine expressing a vulnerable truth. Maybe it's a pulling back in your solar plexus when you consider letting someone see you more completely than you usually allow. These physical contractions are your body's way of showing you where the walls have been built. And here's what's beautiful about this awareness. The same sensitivity that built the walls can also begin to dissolve them. The heart that learned to close for protection can also learn to open for connection. In a mountain monastery, there was a young monk who had joined the community after experiencing a devastating betrayal in his previous life. He threw himself into spiritual practice with great dedication, but his fellow monks noticed that he kept everyone at arm's length. He was kind but distant, helpful but never personally available, present but somehow protected behind an invisible barrier. His teacher watched this pattern with patient compassion for many months before finally approaching him. "Brother," the teacher said gently, I see how diligently you practice meditation, how carefully you follow all the rules of our community. But tell me, how do you practice loving kindness toward yourself?" The young monk was confused by the question. "I try to be kind to everyone," he replied. "But what about the part of you that was hurt?" the teacher asked. "Do you treat that wounded part with kindness, or do you keep it locked away because you're ashamed of its pain?" This question reveals something crucial about opening a protected heart. Often, the first step isn't learning to trust others more. It's learning to have compassion for the parts of yourself that got hurt and needed protection. Many people are angry at themselves for being wounded, frustrated with their own sensitivity, ashamed of their need for safety. But healing begins with understanding that your protection mechanisms weren't failures. They were intelligent responses to real difficulties. The young monk in our story had never honored the wisdom of his own hurt. He had judged his past self for being too trusting and his present self for being too closed. But both responses were actually appropriate to their circumstances. The trusting heart had been beautiful in its openness. The protected heart had been wise in its caution. Healing didn't require choosing between them. It required integrating both into a heart that could be both open and wise. This integration is what Buddhist teachers call skillful vulnerability. It's the capacity to remain open-hearted while also being discerning about when, where, and with whom you share your deeper truths. It recognizes that not everyone has earned the right to your full transparency, but that doesn't mean you need to live behind walls all the time. Think about a flower that opens to the morning sun but closes during the heat of midday and the chill of night. The flower isn't being inconsistent or defensive. It's responding appropriately to different conditions. Your heart can learn the same kind of natural responsiveness, opening when it's safe and beneficial to do so, maintaining boundaries when protection is needed. But how do you know when it's safe to open? How do you distinguish between appropriate caution and unnecessary fear? This is where your body's wisdom becomes invaluable. Your nervous system is constantly reading the safety of your environment through subtle cues that your conscious mind might miss. When you're with someone who feels truly safe, your body naturally relaxes. Your breathing deepens, your muscles soften, your heart opens without effort. When you're with someone who triggers your protection mechanisms, the opposite happens. Your breathing becomes shallow, your muscles tense, your heart contracts. Learning to trust these somatic signals is part of developing skillful vulnerability. Your body often knows before your mind does whether someone is trustworthy with your tender places. There's another aspect to opening a protected heart that many people overlook: the recognition that keeping your heart closed hurts not just you, but also the people who genuinely care about you. When you withhold your authentic self from people who have earned your trust, you deprive them of the gift of really knowing you. You rob them of the opportunity to love you completely, and you rob yourself of the experience of being fully received. A wise teacher once said, "Your heart is not a possession to be hoarded. It's a gift to be shared with those who can appreciate its value." This doesn't mean giving your heart away carelessly. It means recognizing that a heart kept perpetually closed is like a song that's never sung, beautiful in potential, but never able to fulfill its purpose. The gradual opening of a protected heart often happens in stages. like the layers of an onion being gently peeled away. You might start by sharing small vulnerabilities with people who have shown themselves to be trustworthy. You might begin expressing your authentic feelings about minor things before working up to major emotional truths. You might practice saying no when you need to, which paradoxically makes it safer to say yes when you want to. Each small act of authentic expression teaches your nervous system that openness doesn't automatically lead to catastrophe. Each positive response to your vulnerability helps reprogram the old belief that showing your true self is dangerous. Over time, your default setting begins to shift from defended to discerning, from closed to consciously open. This process requires tremendous patience with yourself. Hearts that have been closed for years don't open overnight, and there will likely be setbacks, times when someone handles your openness carelessly and you feel the old urge to slam the walls back up. These moments are not failures, they're information. They teach you more about what you need to feel safe, what kinds of responses nourish your trust, and how to communicate your boundaries clearly. There's a beautiful practice in loving kindness meditation where you place your hand on your heart and offer yourself the same compassion you would give to a dear friend who was struggling. For people with protected hearts, this practice can be revolutionary. It begins to heal the internal environment that made closing necessary in the first place. When you become a safe person for yourself, you become more available for genuine connection with others. As you practice this internal kindness, you might notice that your need for external validation begins to diminish. When you're no longer trying to get from others what you're unwilling to give yourself, your relationships become less desperate and more genuine. You can afford to be selective about who gets access to your deeper self because you're no longer starving for acceptance. You also might discover that opening your heart doesn't make you more vulnerable to being hurt. It actually makes you more resilient. A heart that's been softened by self-compassion can handle disappointment better than a heart that's been hardened by self-protection. When you know how to comfort yourself, you can take the risks that lead to meaningful connection without fearing that rejection will destroy you. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, you can practice this gentle opening. Place your hand on your heart and feel the steady rhythm of your heartbeat. This heart has carried you through every difficulty you've ever faced. It has loved as well as it knew how, protected you when protection was needed, and remained open to whatever healing was possible. Breathe into your heart space and imagine the walls becoming more permeable, not disappearing entirely, but becoming like a garden gate that can open and close as wisdom dictates. Feel gratitude for all the ways your heart has served you, including the ways it learned to protect itself. And set an intention to honor both your need for safety and your longing for connection as you move forward. Your heart wants to love and be loved. It wants to give and receive in the natural rhythm of healthy relationship. The walls were never meant to be permanent. They were meant to give you time to heal, to learn, to develop the wisdom that makes true intimacy possible. Now you can begin to trust that your heart is strong enough to handle both the joy and the sorrow that come with genuine connection. Like the garden that thrived when its walls became gates, your life becomes more beautiful when your heart learns to open skillfully, protected by wisdom, guided by discernment, but no longer imprisoned by fear. This is the courage that makes love possible. the vulnerability that makes connection real, the openness that allows life to touch you deeply enough to matter. Once your heart has learned to open skillfully, once you can feel emotions without being controlled by them, a deeper question emerges from the quiet spaces of your awareness. How do you move through a world that never stops changing? Rivers don't ask permission before altering their course. Seasons arrive and depart on their own schedule. People grow, relationships evolve, circumstances shift like sand dunes in an endless wind. Most of us spend enormous energy trying to make life hold still. We want our good days to last forever and our difficult phases to hurry past. Security, we believe, comes from stopping change or at least controlling its direction. Yet the very thing we resist, this constant flow of transformation, is what keeps life alive, what makes growth possible, what ensures that no difficulty lasts forever. A master woodworker once shared the secret of creating furniture that lasted for generations. "I don't fight against the wood's natural grain," he explained to his apprentice. "Wood expands and contracts with humidity, warps slightly with temperature changes, develops character marks over time." The apprentice looked puzzled. "But doesn't that make the furniture less perfect?" The master smiled, running his hand along a table that had served his family for 50 years. Perfect means working with reality, not demanding that reality be different than it is. This wisdom applies to every aspect of human existence. Relationships that try to remain exactly the same gradually become brittle and break. Bodies that resist the natural aging process often suffer more than those that adapt gracefully to each life stage. Minds that insist on controlling every outcome exhaust themselves fighting currents they cannot redirect. Buddhist philosophy calls this resistance to natural flow dukkha, often translated as suffering, but more accurately understood as the friction that occurs when life pushes against our rigid expectations. A wheel that's perfectly round rolls smoothly down any road, but a wheel with flat spots created by our demands for how the journey should go creates bumps, jerks, and unnecessary wear on the entire vehicle. Picture a river carving its path through a landscape over thousands of years. Water doesn't argue with mountains. Instead, it finds the most efficient route around obstacles, gradually wearing away what can be changed while flowing around what cannot. The river reaches the sea not through force, but through persistence, flexibility, and an unwavering commitment to its ultimate direction, despite countless detours along the way. You possess this same capacity for intelligent adaptation. When circumstances shift unexpectedly, you can rage against the change, or you can ask yourself, how do I flow skillfully with what's actually happening? When relationships evolve beyond your comfort zone, you can demand they return to familiar patterns, or explore what new forms of connection might be possible. When your body ages, when your career changes direction, when life dismantles plans you thought were permanent, you face the same choice the river faces. Fight uselessly against reality, or find the most graceful way to work with it. An elderly tea master was known throughout her region for the extraordinary quality of her ceremonies. Students would travel great distances to learn her techniques, expecting to memorize precise movements and exact timing. Instead, she taught them something unexpected. Every tea ceremony is different, she would say, because every moment is different. The temperature of the water varies slightly. The humidity affects how the tea leaves unfold. Each guest brings unique energy to the gathering. Mastery lies not in performing identical movements, but in responding perfectly to what this specific moment requires. This teaching points toward what Taoists call Wu-wei, action that arises naturally from present circumstances rather than from predetermined scripts. Wu-wei doesn't mean passivity. A master musician doesn't passively let her fingers fall randomly on the keys. Rather, she responds so fluidly to the music's emerging requirements that technique becomes invisible, leaving only pure expression. Living in Wu-wei means developing the sensitivity to feel when to act and when to wait, when to speak and when to listen, when to persist and when to pivot. This sensitivity cannot be learned through rules or formulas. Like the tea master adapting to each ceremony's unique conditions, you must cultivate the capacity to read each situation freshly rather than applying yesterday's solutions to today's challenges. Consider how different your days become when you approach them with this flowing awareness. Instead of forcing yourself through a rigid schedule, regardless of your energy levels, you learn to work with your natural rhythms. Rather than demanding that conversations follow predetermined agendas, you become curious about where authentic dialogue wants to lead. You stop trying to manufacture specific outcomes and start collaborating with whatever possibilities are actually emerging. This shift requires redefining what strength means. Many people equate strength with rigidity, the ability to maintain the same position regardless of external pressures. But observe bamboo during a typhoon. The strongest trees are those that bend so far they nearly touch the ground, then spring back to vertical when the storm passes. They survive not because they're unmovable, but because they're incredibly flexible while remaining rooted in something deeper than surface appearances. Your own roots run deeper than your circumstances. Beneath the changing conditions of your external life lies an awareness that remains constant. The same consciousness that witnessed your childhood is witnessing this moment. Jobs may come and go, relationships may evolve or end, your body will age and eventually die, but the awareness experiencing all of this remains mysteriously unchanged. When you learn to rest in this deeper stability, surface changes become less threatening and more interesting. A young farmer inherited land that experienced severe droughts every few years. His neighbors constantly complained about the unpredictable weather, always surprised and frustrated when dry seasons arrived. But this farmer studied the patterns, learned which crops thrived in different conditions, and developed multiple water conservation strategies. When droughts came, he was ready. When abundant rains returned, he celebrated without becoming attached to the temporary abundance. Weather changes, he would say simply. My job is to farm skillfully regardless of which weather shows up. This farmer understood something crucial about working with life's natural cycles. Change isn't an interruption to normal life. Change is normal life. Expecting things to remain stable is like expecting the ocean to stop having waves. Once you accept that flux is the fundamental nature of existence, you can stop being surprised by change and start developing the skills needed to navigate it gracefully. These skills include learning to recognize the early signs of transition before they become crises. Rivers don't suddenly decide to change course. They gradually find new channels as landscapes shift beneath them. Similarly, most major life changes give subtle signals long before they become unavoidable. Relationships show stress before they break. Bodies develop minor symptoms before serious illness. Career dissatisfaction builds gradually before exploding into crisis. When you're flowing with life rather than fighting it, you become more sensitive to these early signals. You notice when your energy feels misaligned with your commitments. You recognize when patterns that once served you have become constraining. You feel when relationships need attention before they become troubled. This awareness allows you to make small course corrections that prevent major disruptions. But what about when major disruptions come anyway? When change arrives uninvited and unwelcome? Even then, the river's wisdom applies. Water doesn't become bitter when it encounters boulders. It doesn't waste energy, resenting obstacles, or demanding they move. Instead, it finds the path of least resistance, while maintaining its essential nature and ultimate direction. A meditation teacher lost her voice completely due to a rare neurological condition. For months, she grieved the loss of her primary means of sharing wisdom. Her students expected her to retire, to retreat from teaching since speaking had become impossible. Instead, she discovered new forms of transmission. Her written words carried deeper precision because they required more careful crafting. Her silent presence during group meditations became more powerful because students had to attune to subtler forms of guidance. What seemed like the end of her teaching career became its transformation into something she never could have planned, but that served her deeper purpose even more effectively. This story illustrates one of the most profound aspects of trusting life's flow, discovering that what appears to be loss often creates space for unexpected forms of fulfillment. The river blocked by a landslide doesn't disappear. It finds new channels, sometimes creating more beautiful waterfalls and pools than existed before the obstruction. Trusting flow doesn't mean becoming passive or abandoning your dreams and goals. Rivers have direction. They're always moving toward the sea. But they don't insist on traveling in straight lines. You can maintain clear intentions about where you want your life to head, while remaining flexible about the route you take to get there. This balance between intention and flexibility becomes especially important during life's major transitions. Whether you're changing careers, ending a relationship, moving to a new place, or facing illness, these threshold periods often feel chaotic and uncertain. The temptation is either to control every detail of the transition or to drift without any sense of direction. Flowing wisdom suggests a third option, holding your intention lightly while staying alert to the opportunities and guidance that emerge along the way. Think about how different it feels to plan a trip where every detail is rigidly scheduled versus one where you have a general destination but remain open to interesting detours. Both approaches can work, but the second often leads to discoveries you never could have anticipated. Life transitions work similarly. When you trust the flow while maintaining awareness of your deeper values and desires, unexpected possibilities often emerge that prove more fulfilling than anything you could have engineered through pure willpower. Right now, as you listen to these words, you might notice areas of your life where you've been swimming upstream, expending enormous energy trying to force outcomes or resist changes that want to happen naturally. Perhaps there's a relationship that's trying to evolve, but you're holding it in an outdated form. Maybe your body is asking for different rhythms, but you're demanding it maintain the pace of a younger version of yourself. Possibly your career is calling for transformation, but you're clinging to familiar security, even though it no longer nourishes your spirit. Flowing with these natural movements doesn't require dramatic action. Often it begins with simply stopping the resistance. Like the farmer who learned to work with weather patterns rather than fighting them, you can start by acknowledging what's actually happening instead of insisting that reality be different. This acknowledgement creates space for wisdom to emerge about how to respond skillfully to changing circumstances. As you practice this trust in life's natural flow, you might discover something surprising. The energy you were using to resist change becomes available for creating positive transformation. The mental resources spent arguing with reality can be redirected toward adapting gracefully to new conditions. You become like a skilled sailor who stops fighting the wind and starts using it to reach destinations that pure willpower could never achieve. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, you can practice releasing into this natural flow. Let your breathing find its own rhythm without trying to control it. Allow your body to settle into whatever position feels most comfortable without forcing a specific posture. Notice how relaxation happens naturally when you stop trying to make it happen. This same principle applies to sleep itself. You cannot force sleep to come, but you can create conditions that allow it to arrive naturally. Similarly, you cannot force your life to unfold according to a predetermined script, but you can cultivate the wisdom, flexibility, and trust that allow you to flow gracefully with whatever patterns want to emerge. Like water finding its way to the sea, your life has an intelligence that knows how to move toward fulfillment, even when the path isn't visible from where you currently stand. Sometimes this movement looks like progress, sometimes like setbacks, sometimes like periods of stillness that prepare you for the next phase of growth. All of it serves the larger journey toward becoming who you're meant to be. Trust the flow, trust the process, trust that the same force that moves rivers toward oceans and guides seasons through their cycles is also moving through your life, with wisdom you don't always need to understand to benefit from. You are part of a vast, intelligent unfolding that includes you while being infinitely larger than your individual concerns. Rest in this belonging, this trust, this knowing that you don't have to control the current to arrive safely at your destination. There comes a moment in every spiritual journey when all the skills you've learned, all the wisdom you've gathered, all the practices you've mastered begin to feel like elegant preparations for something much simpler and more profound. You've learned to release what doesn't belong to you, to stop carrying mental stones, to hold outcomes lightly, to make peace with the past. Yet beneath all this learning, a deeper invitation waits, the call to let go, not just of specific attachments, but of the very need to manage your existence at all. This is the art of deep surrender, and it's different from everything that came before. Previous teachings asked you to release particular things, other people's emotions, regrets about the past, anxiety about the future. Surrender asks for something more fundamental, releasing the one who thinks they need to do all that releasing. In a remote mountain village, there lived an old woman who had spent decades learning traditional weaving patterns, passed down through generations. Her tapestries were renowned for their intricate beauty and perfect execution. But as her eyes began to fail with age, she could no longer see the fine details that had defined her mastery. Rather than abandoning her craft, she began weaving in complete darkness. Her fingers moved guided by intuition rather than sight, creating patterns that emerged from some deeper knowing than conscious technique. When people saw these new works, they were astounded. The tapestries possessed a quality of spontaneous beauty that surpassed anything she had created during her years of careful control. How do you create such magnificent work without being able to see what you're doing? A visitor asked. The old woman smiled, her hands continuing their rhythmic work. For 50 years, I tried to weave perfect patterns. Now the patterns weave themselves through me. Surrender taught me that the most beautiful things emerge when I stop trying to be the one making them beautiful. This story points towards surrender's deepest mystery. After years of learning how to live skillfully, there comes an invitation to discover what happens when life lives through you, rather than being something you try to live correctly. It's the difference between swimming with great technique and floating in a way that lets the water hold you completely. Most people resist this level of letting go because it feels like giving up, like becoming passive or irresponsible. But authentic surrender is intensely alive and surprisingly active. When the old weaver stopped trying to control every thread, her hands became more responsive to the fabric's needs, not less. When you surrender the exhausting job of micromanaging your existence, energy becomes available for a different kind of engagement with life, one that's more spontaneous, more intuitive, more aligned with forces larger than your individual will. Buddhist teaching describes this as moving from self-power to other power, from relying solely on your personal efforts to opening to a wisdom that transcends your limited perspective. This doesn't mean abandoning responsibility or effort. Instead, your actions begin arising from a deeper source, like a spring bubbling up from underground rather than water you have to pump manually. Picture the difference between a musician playing notes from sheet music and one improvising from years of internalized understanding. Both require skill, but improvisation has a flowing quality that comes from trusting something beyond conscious control. The musician knows the scales, understands harmony, feels rhythm in their bones, but the actual notes that emerge in each moment arise spontaneously from this deep foundation rather than predetermined thought. Living from surrender has this same improvisational quality. Your values remain clear, your compassion stays active, your wisdom continues growing. But the specific ways these qualities express themselves become less calculated and more spontaneous. You find yourself saying exactly what needs to be said without rehearsing it first. Actions arise that serve situations perfectly, despite not being planned. Solutions appear for problems you weren't even consciously working on. A renowned chef described his evolution this way. Early in my career, I followed recipes obsessively, measuring every ingredient precisely, timing each step exactly. But cooking became an art only when I learned to taste constantly, to feel what each dish needed in real time, to let the ingredients guide the process rather than imposing predetermined outcomes. His food became legendary, not when he gained more control over his cooking, but when he developed enough skill to surrender control intelligently. This intelligent surrender requires everything you've learned so far. You cannot let go safely without first developing the wisdom to recognize what deserves your effort and what doesn't. You cannot trust larger forces without first learning to distinguish between your authentic inner guidance and the fearful chatter of ego. You cannot surrender control without first developing enough skill to engage responsively with whatever arises. But once these foundations are established, holding on too tightly to even skillful control becomes another form of suffering. It's like learning to ride a bicycle by holding the handlebars so rigidly that you can't balance properly. At some point, skillful riding requires relaxing your grip and trusting the bicycle's natural tendency to stay upright when it's moving forward. Many meditation students experience this transition during long periods of practice. Initially, they work diligently to concentrate their minds, follow their breath, maintain awareness. These efforts are necessary and beneficial. But eventually, the meditation begins doing itself. Awareness becomes effortless, concentration arises naturally, breath and mind find their own rhythm without conscious management. The meditator realizes they've become the space in which meditation happens, rather than the one making meditation happen. This shift from doing to being extends far beyond formal spiritual practice. Relationships become more authentic when you stop trying to manage how others perceive you and start responding genuinely to what each interaction actually requires. Work becomes more fulfilling when you focus on serving each task's real needs, rather than manufacturing impressive results. Even daily activities like cooking, cleaning, or walking can become forms of moving meditation when approached with this quality of surrendered attention. But surrender isn't always peaceful or comfortable. Sometimes it means releasing cherished self-images that no longer serve you. A successful executive might need to surrender the identity of being someone who has all the answers. A caregiver might need to release the role of being indispensable to others' well-being. A spiritual seeker might need to let go of being someone who's progressing toward enlightenment. These identity deaths can feel genuinely frightening because they challenge your most basic assumptions about who you are and what gives your life meaning. Yet what emerges on the other side is often a more spacious, more authentic way of being that couldn't have developed while you were clinging to previous self-definitions. A master gardener worked for decades, creating elaborate formal gardens with perfectly manicured landscapes. But when arthritis made precise cultivation impossible, she was forced to let parts of her garden grow wild. Initially, this felt like failure, like abandoning her life's work. However, as native plants returned and wildlife flourished in the unmaintained areas, she discovered a different kind of beauty emerging, one that was more alive, more dynamic, more connected to natural cycles than anything her careful control had produced. I thought surrender meant giving up on beauty, she reflected years later. Instead, it taught me that beauty has its own intelligence that often surpasses human planning. The wild sections of her garden became gathering places for birds, butterflies, and beneficial insects that had never appeared in the formal areas. Seeds carried by wind and animals created surprising combinations of plants that she never would have chosen, but that somehow complemented each other perfectly. This gardener's experience illustrates surrender's fundamental paradox. Letting go of control often produces outcomes more beautiful and beneficial than anything you could have engineered through willpower alone. This happens because surrender opens you to possibilities your limited perspective couldn't imagine and connects you with forces of creativity, healing, and growth that operate beyond the scope of individual planning. In Zen tradition, there's a saying, "Great doubt leads to great awakening." This doubt isn't skepticism about spiritual truth, but rather a profound questioning of your assumptions about how life works and who you think you are. When you doubt whether you actually need to control everything, space opens for discovering what takes care of itself when you're not interfering. When you question whether your identity is as solid as you've assumed, you might glimpse the vast awareness that exists beyond all temporary self-definitions. This great doubt naturally leads to what could be called great trust, not blind faith in external authorities, but confidence in life's fundamental intelligence. Watch how wounds heal without conscious direction, how plants grow toward light without being taught, how ecosystems balance themselves through countless interconnected relationships. The same intelligence that coordinates these processes is also moving through your life, though it often operates in ways too subtle or complex for ordinary thinking to recognize. Surrender involves learning to cooperate with this deeper intelligence rather than trying to override it with personal preferences. This doesn't mean becoming passive or abandoning discernment. Just as the chef still chooses ingredients carefully, even while letting the cooking process guide itself, you continue making conscious choices while holding them lightly enough that better possibilities can emerge if they arise. Right now, as you listen to these words, you might be able to feel places where you're still gripping, still trying to manage outcomes that could unfold more gracefully if you relaxed your control. Maybe it's a relationship you're trying to force into a particular shape. Perhaps it's anxiety about a future situation that hasn't even happened yet. Possibly, it's the very effort to understand these teachings perfectly or apply them correctly. What would it feel like to release even these subtle forms of holding on? Can you allow this conversation between these words and your awareness to unfold naturally without needing to grasp every concept or achieve any particular state? Can you let your breathing find its own rhythm, your body settle into its own preferred position, your mind respond to what it actually hears, rather than what you think you should be understanding? This is how surrender begins, with small experiments in letting life live itself through you, rather than constantly trying to live life according to your plans. Each time you choose trust over control, each moment you allow natural processes to unfold without interference, you're practicing the art that the old weaver mastered when she learned to let patterns create themselves through her hands. Tonight, as you prepare for sleep, you have the perfect opportunity to practice this deepest form of letting go. Sleep cannot be forced or controlled. It arrives when you stop trying to make it happen. Your body knows how to rest. Your nervous system understands how to transition from waking consciousness to dreams. Your entire being has been practicing this daily surrender to unconsciousness for your entire life. Let tonight's sleep become a teacher in the art of surrender. Notice how relaxation deepens when you stop managing it, how peace emerges when you quit trying to create it. How rest comes naturally when you finally trust that you don't need to remain vigilant over every aspect of your existence. The patterns will weave themselves. The garden will find its own beauty. Your life will unfold with an intelligence that surpasses your individual planning when you learn to cooperate with forces larger and wiser than your separate self. This is the ultimate teaching. You don't have to figure everything out, control every outcome, or even understand the deeper purposes being served through your experience. You only need to show up fully for each moment and trust that the same creative force that moves stars through their cycles and seasons through their changes is also guiding your journey with perfect wisdom, especially when you can't see where the path is leading. Here we are, having traveled together through landscapes of wisdom that have been offering healing for over 2,000 years. You've learned to distinguish between what's yours to carry and what belongs to others. Mental stones that once weighed down your awareness have been gently set aside. The grip of needing outcomes to match your preferences has softened into something more spacious and trusting. Echoes from the past have transformed from burdens into teachers. Your natural stillness has been rediscovered beneath all the noise. The fire of emotions no longer burns destructively, but warms your heart with wisdom. Walls around your heart have become gates that open and close with conscious choice. Life's natural flow has become a current you work with, rather than against. And finally, you've touched the edges of what it means to let existence live through you rather than constantly trying to manage every detail of your experience. But perhaps the most profound teaching of all is this: none of these insights need to be grasped, perfected, or turned into new burdens of spiritual achievement. They're more like seeds that have been planted in the fertile soil of your awareness, seeds that will grow naturally when conditions are right, without forcing or constant tending. There's an ancient story about a student who approached her teacher after years of intensive practice, carrying a heavy bag filled with books, meditation cushions, prayer beads, and various spiritual tools. "Master," she said, "I've learnt so many techniques, memorized countless teachings, practiced every method you've shared. Yet I still feel like something essential is missing." The teacher looked at the overflowing bag and smiled gently. "Come with me," she said, leading the student to a simple room that contained nothing but a single cushion in the center. "Sit here," the teacher instructed. "But what technique should I use?" the student asked, reaching for her bag of tools. "Just sit," the teacher repeated. "But which teaching should I contemplate?" "None," came the reply. "Then what should I do?" The teacher's eyes twinkled with infinite kindness. "Nothing. Just be what you already are." In that moment, the student realized that all her learning had been preparation for this simple recognition. Beneath every technique, beyond every teaching, prior to every spiritual accomplishment, there was already a completeness that needed nothing added to it. The bag of tools wasn't wrong. It had served its purpose by bringing her to this point of understanding. But now she could set it down and discover what remained when even spiritual striving was released. This is where your own journey arrives tonight. Everything you've learned through these hours has been leading to this moment of recognition. You don't need to become someone different to find peace. You don't need to perfect any technique or eliminate all difficulties from your life. You don't need to carry these teachings like additional weight in an already full bag. Instead, you can let everything you've heard tonight settle into your being the way water soaks into parched earth. Some insights will take root immediately, growing into new ways of responding to daily challenges. Others will lie dormant until circumstances arise that call them forth. Some may fade from conscious memory entirely, yet continue influencing your choices in subtle ways you'll never directly notice. This natural integration happens not through effort, but through relaxation. When you stop trying to memorize wisdom and start embodying it, when you quit grasping insights and begin living them, the teachings transform from information into the very fabric of how you move through the world. Think of how a tree absorbs sunlight. It doesn't strain to capture every photon or worry about converting light efficiently into energy. The absorption happens naturally through processes so fundamental that conscious intervention would only interfere. Your psyche has this same capacity for absorbing exactly what it needs from tonight's teachings, while allowing everything else to flow through without resistance. Right now, you might notice that your breathing has naturally slowed and deepened over the course of our time together. This isn't because you were trying to breathe differently, but because the nervous system automatically relaxes when it's no longer carrying unnecessary burdens. Each teaching that resonated, each weight that was released, each moment of recognition created a little more space for your natural peace to emerge. Feel how different your body feels now compared to when you first began listening. Perhaps there's a softness around your eyes that wasn't there before. Maybe your shoulders have dropped away from your ears without conscious instruction. Possibly your jaw has unclenched, your hands have opened, your heart has expanded just enough to let in a breath of relief. These physical changes reflect deeper shifts in how you're relating to your experience. Where there was tension, spaciousness has appeared. Where there was grasping, allowance has emerged. Where there was resistance, acceptance has quietly taken root. None of this required dramatic transformation or heroic spiritual effort, just the gentle willingness to set down what was never yours to carry. In Zen tradition, there's a beautiful concept called beginner's mind, approaching each moment with fresh eyes, rather than through the filter of accumulated knowledge. Paradoxically, the more you learn about spiritual wisdom, the more important it becomes to hold that learning lightly. Tonight's teachings are most powerful when they become part of your natural responsiveness, rather than mental concepts you try to apply. This means you don't need to remember everything you heard tonight in order to benefit from it. You don't need to create practice schedules or spiritual disciplines around these insights. You don't need to analyze how well you're implementing Buddhist principles or measure your progress toward enlightenment. The deepest integration happens when you simply continue living your life while remaining open to the natural emergence of greater wisdom, compassion, and freedom. Consider how learning to walk happened when you were very young. No one gave you lectures about balance, coordination, or the physics of bipedal locomotion. You simply kept trying to move forward, falling down, getting back up, gradually developing the complex set of skills that now allow you to walk without thinking about it. Spiritual development often follows the same pattern, organic, gradual, more about falling gracefully than achieving perfection. Tomorrow morning, you won't wake up as a completely different person. The same life circumstances will be waiting for your attention. Similar challenges and opportunities will arise. But something subtle yet significant will have shifted in how you meet these familiar situations. You might notice yourself responding rather than reacting, choosing rather than defaulting to old patterns, breathing through difficulties that once triggered automatic stress responses. These changes may be so natural that you barely notice them happening. You might find yourself setting down a mental stone without remembering tonight's teaching about carrying unnecessary weight. Perhaps you'll listen to a friend's problems with genuine compassion while spontaneously maintaining healthy emotional boundaries. Maybe you'll face an unexpected change with curiosity rather than immediate resistance, trusting life's flow without conscious reference to anything you learned about rivers tonight. This unconscious integration is actually a sign that the teachings have taken root at a level deeper than mental understanding. Like water absorbed by thirsty soil, wisdom that truly serves you becomes invisible as separate knowledge and emerges as transformed being. As you prepare now for the final transition into sleep, you can practice this ultimate form of letting go. Release any effort to hold on to insights from tonight. Allow your mind to stop processing and analyzing what you've heard. Let go of any agenda to be different tomorrow because of what you've learned today. Simply rest in the recognition that you are already complete, exactly as you are. Everything you've sought through spiritual seeking, everything you've hoped to find through self-improvement, everything you've imagined would come through achieving perfect inner peace. All of it has been present in you all along, waiting not to be created, but to be uncovered. Like the student who discovered that what she was seeking was what was already sitting in the empty room, you can recognize that the peace you've been traveling toward has been the very awareness that's been listening to these words all along. The wisdom you've been gathering has been emanating from the intelligence that understands these teachings without effort. The love you've been cultivating has been the natural warmth of the heart that's been beating steadily throughout this entire journey. Tonight, as sleep welcomes you into its healing embrace, you don't need to take anything with you into dreams except this simple knowing: you are enough. You have enough. You are already home in yourself. The seeds have been planted. The garden will grow itself. Your only job now is to rest in the fertile silence where all wisdom grows, where all peace abides, where all love originates and returns. Let everything dissolve now: the teachings, the teacher, the one who learned, even the distinction between waking and sleeping. What remains is what was always here: pure awareness, naturally peaceful, completely free, eternally at rest in its own boundless nature. This is your true home, and you've never actually left it. Welcome back to yourself. Welcome to this moment, where nothing needs to be different, for everything to be perfect. Welcome to the peace that was never lost, and therefore never needs to be found. Now we enter the most gentle transition of all, where everything you've discovered tonight becomes a bridge into the healing realm of deep rest. There's nothing left to learn, nothing more to understand, nothing to accomplish or achieve. Your only invitation now is to let your body remember what it has always known: how to surrender completely into profound relaxation. Begin by feeling the weight of your body exactly where it lies. Notice how the surface beneath you rises up to meet you, supporting every curve and angle without effort or complaint. Your body has carried you faithfully through this entire journey tonight, and now it's time to offer it the gift of complete release. Let your attention drift gently to the crown of your head. Feel any remaining tension in your scalp simply melting away, like warm honey flowing down over your temples. Your forehead can soften now, releasing any furrows of concentration or concern. The space between your eyebrows widens and smooths, creating room for peace to settle there like a gentle touch. Allow your eyes to rest completely behind closed lids. They've seen so much today, processed countless images and impressions. Now they can simply float in comfortable darkness, no longer needing to focus on anything at all. Your jaw unclenches naturally, creating space between your teeth. Your tongue rests softly in your mouth, no words left to speak. Feel this wave of relaxation flowing down through your neck and shoulders. These shoulders have carried so much weight, not just tonight, but for years. Let them drop away from your ears, sinking down toward the earth with grateful surrender. Your arms become heavy and loose, like water finding its natural level. Your hands open completely, palms soft, fingers naturally curved. With each breath, this gentle melting continues down into your chest. Your heart, which has been learning to open throughout our time together, can now rest in its natural rhythm. No need to protect or guard anymore. Your ribs expand and contract with the easy rhythm of breathing that requires no thought, no management, no control. The soft area of your belly rises and falls like gentle waves against a peaceful shore. Any tension held here from old emotions, ancient fears, or daily stress simply dissolves into this oceanic breathing. Your lower back releases into the support beneath you, finally trusting that you don't need to hold yourself up anymore. This river of relaxation flows down through your hips and pelvis, through your thighs and knees, pooling in your calves before finally draining out through your feet. Your entire body becomes like still water, perfectly at rest, needing nothing, holding nothing, just peacefully being. As your physical form settles into this profound quiet, all the teachings from tonight begin weaving themselves into the fabric of your being. You don't need to consciously review them or try to remember every detail. They're becoming part of your cells, part of your breath, part of the wisdom your body carries forward. The understanding about releasing others' emotions becomes a gentle strength in your nervous system. The knowledge of how to set down mental stones transforms into a natural lightness in your thoughts. The wisdom about flowing with change becomes fluid grace in your very bones. All the walls around your heart have become doors that open and close with love's own intelligence. The fire of your emotions burns now with steady warmth rather than destructive heat. Your natural stillness spreads through every fiber of your being like moonlight flooding a quiet valley. You are held now by forces far greater than your individual will. The same intelligence that guides planets in their orbits and seasons in their cycles is cradling you in this moment. The same love that moves through every act of genuine compassion is surrounding you like an infinite embrace. This deep rest is not escape from life. It's a return to the source of all energy, where restoration happens without effort, where insights integrate naturally, where your soul touches the quiet depths that busy days cannot reach. In this moment, you rest not as someone who has problems to solve or progress to make, but as someone who is already complete, already whole, already home in the vast awareness that you truly are. Let go now of being anyone in particular. Release the effort of being a person with a history, with concerns, with tasks waiting for tomorrow. Dissolve into the pure being that exists before all stories, beyond all identities, prior to all the coming and going of experience. You are the sky in which all clouds appear and disappear. You are the ocean in which all waves rise and fall. You are the silence in which all sounds emerge and fade. Rest now in this knowing, whether you drift towards sleep or simply remain in this profound relaxation. The breath breathes itself. The heart beats itself. Rest comes by itself. Nothing to do. Nothing to become. Nothing to achieve. Just this. Just resting. Just home.